Everything you need to know about implementation planning. That's what we're going to talk about here in episode 187 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. My name is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And you can find new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation from a tech agnostic and objective point of view. And again, you can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes you might have missed and to keep up with new episodes as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is the company I work for, and it is sponsored by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. Got a great show for you today. It's a sort of a more of a masterclass more than anything, more than a traditional podcast, to be honest. We're going to pull together everything related to implementation planning. We've got some great video clips we're going to play for you. We're going to start off by talking about how to construct a digital strategy. So we're going to sort of start off at a high level, talk about what it is that's required to build a solid digital strategy and how creating that digital strategy is a lot like building a house and how you need to have that blueprint in place before you start building. And that's exactly what sort of leads us into implementation planning here today. So we'll start off by talking about how to construct digital strategy. We'll talk about what is implementation phase 0 and why it's so important to organizations going through digital transformations and ERP implementations. And then we'll also give a bit of an introduction to project planning. So we'll talk about what phase 0 is, but then we'll kind of get into what exactly is project planning. What are some of the major work streams you need to think about? And then we're going to bring on our first guest. It's going to be Rachel, who's the CEO of Setuply. And she's going to be on the show. She's going to be joining me to talk about how to collaborate on projects and how to set up a project team and onboard a project team as part of your implementation planning process. So stick around for that. Rachel will be on the show here later today. And then we'll also get into program versus project management, what the differences are and what you need to know about those differences, to-dos before starting a digital transformation. And then finally, last but not least, later in the show, stick around because we're going to talk about how to create a realistic project plan. So we'll tell you all the things you need to do to create a project plan throughout this episode, but the last segment will be focused on how to make sure it's realistic. So lots to cover here today. So we're just going to jump right in. We're going to start off by playing you a YouTube video clip here from my YouTube channel where we talk about how to construct a digital strategy and how creating that digital strategy is a lot like building a house. And so just like you would not likely build a house without having a solid blueprint and a clear vision of what you want, without having the architecture and the diagrams all drawn up and a good understanding of how you're going to use subcontractors and what the general contractor is going to manage to. If you don't have that blueprint and that architecture, you're probably not going to have a house built very effectively. So that's a lot like how digital transformations should be. And a lot of organizations don't think of it that way, though. So we're going to talk here in this segment about how to construct a digital strategy and how that is a lot like building a house and how you can apply that concept to your digital transformation. So let's go ahead and roll the clip. One of the biggest dynamics we see and one of the biggest pitfalls we see organizations fall into is this sense of motivation to just jump straight into deploying technology. You've identified your needs, you've defined what it is you want out of technology, you've identified the best technology solution or solutions that are the best fit for your organization, and you simply just jump straight into designing and building and deploying technology. And that's a big problem that will lead to challenges during digital transformation. Much like a house can't be built or it can't be built effectively without a blueprint from an architect, you also need a blueprint for your implementation. So in other words, rather than just defining your high-level business requirements, picking software, and then start building stuff, you need to take the time up front to do the implementation, readiness, and the phase 0 of your transformation to really take the time to define what your future state business processes are going to be, what you want your future state organization to look like, and other aspects of your digital transformation. Now, a lot of times software vendors and system integrators will suggest, don't worry about the blueprint, we'll help you do that. And they may do that to some degree. They're going to help you define how the software should be built, but still you don't have the bigger picture vision or blueprint of how your business is going to operate. They're looking for the blueprint for how technology should be built. And they can certainly accomplish that, but the likelihood of that being aligned with what your business needs are is very low. In fact, you're highly likely to have misalignment there. And a good way to look at this is to say, if you were building a house, you wouldn't decide that you're going to build a house and say it's a 2-story house, it's 2,000 square feet, and you're just going to start bringing in the plumber to start putting in the plumbing. You're not going to do that without a blueprint. You need that overall blueprint to show how the house is going to be built and how all the different pieces are going to fit together. So when you hire a software vendor or a system integrator to come in and just start deploying stuff, it's a lot like hiring the plumber as the first step in building a house. It's just something you don't do. And if you do that, it's going to be on a shaky foundation, and chances are pretty high that you're not going to have a stable foundation or a stable house to work from. So one of the most important things you can do, or one of the most important lessons you can learn from building a house, is the need to have the architecture and the blueprint for what your business is going to look like in the future so that your digital transformation can support that and fall within the realm of what you're trying to accomplish. So while the blueprint gives you the vision of what the end state is going to look like and what the overall house or the digital transformation is going to look like, you also need a solid foundation. You don't start putting in the framing and the flooring and the plumbing and the electrical until you've got the foundation built. In fact, it's one of the first things you do when you build a house. And the same is true for digital transformation. You need to make sure you've got the solid foundation before you start building technology and building other aspects of your transformation on top of it. So some examples of what those foundational activities are would be, first of all, project governance. What is the overall project governance for how you're going to manage the vendors, the system integrators, the consultants, all that good stuff? You need to have a clear set of processes, roles and responsibilities, and that overall vision for how the project will be managed. That's a core foundational part of your transformation. You also have organizational change management. Without effectively impacting the human side of change, the project is not going to succeed. And so you need to have a clear organizational change strategy and a clear organizational change plan before you start even thinking about deploying technology. So taking that time to define that organizational change strategy and plan is critical, and it's a key foundational aspect of your transformation. And then finally, another example is your overall technical architecture. You might be deploying a single ERP system, or you might be deploying human capital management or CRM or supply chain management technology. Whatever software it is, chances are you're doing that in the context of other systems. You have the need to integrate to other systems. You have the need to bring data over from your legacy systems and whatnot. And so that vision for what the overall technical architecture will look like, how you're going to migrate data, how you're going to integrate systems, all that stuff is another foundational aspect of your digital transformation. So before you get too far into your transformation, you want to make sure you have these key foundational aspects completed, or that foundation laid, to use the analogy of house building, before you get too far into your project. When you're building a house, or in most cases when you build a house, you have a general contractor. That general contractor hires the electricians, the drywall people, the people that do the flooring, plumbing, all that stuff, the roofing. And that's a lot like how digital transformation is. You need a general contractor that can manage all the different moving parts and different parties that are involved in transformation. Now, the problem with our industry is that software vendors and system integrators often sell themselves as that general contractor, or they might argue that you don't need that general contractor because they're the ones providing the technology. But again, it's like a plumber coming in and saying, I can be your general contractor. Most people intuitively understand that the plumber is not the general contractor. That's something very different. The plumber is one of many subcontractors that need to be managed throughout the process, and therefore you need a general contractor. So again, even if you're deploying one single type of technology, that software vendor that provides the nuts and bolts of how the software is going to work is one subcontractor. But you also have to address change management. You've got to address architecture, data migration and integration, and of course the overall program management that ties it all together. So that's why providing that program management, the high-level view and that high-level management of all the different moving parts is so important, just like the general contractor is so important to building a house. When you're building a house, usually you have very clearly defined roles. The plumber does the plumbing, the electrician does the electrical, the flooring guy or gal does the flooring, the roofer does the roofing, and it's very clearly defined, and it makes sense because you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can tie it back to the blueprint or the architectural work that was done early on. But the problem with digital transformation is a lot of times people don't fully understand all those different subcontractors that need to be involved. Now, of course, when I talk about subcontractors here and using this analogy, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the resources I'm talking about on a digital transformation necessarily need to be subcontractors. Some of them could be internal resources. Some of them could be outside consulting firms. Some of them would come from your software vendor, your system integrator. So multiple parties could provide resources to help you with this. But the key here is to understand what all those pieces are. And so in the same way that a plumber isn't going to come in and give you an estimate of how long it's going to take to build a house, nor are they going to be able to give you an accurate cost estimate of how much it'll cost you to build the house, neither can a software vendor or system integrator tell you how much time or money it's going to take to go through your digital transformation. And the reason for that is because they're just one subcontractor within the bigger picture. You need the other subcontractors to provide inputs into the process, and then the general contractor, as we just talked about before, is the one that kind of pulls this all together and looks at the overall time frame, the overall budget, ties it all together, make sure you have an overarching plan, and that's the role that the general contractor plays relative to the subcontractors. So when you're looking at planning for your project, you're setting your budget, you're defining roles, you just want to make sure you have all those different subcontractor roles defined as it relates to your digital transformation. Now, in most parts of the world, when you build a house or any sort of building, there's extensive government regulations on what qualifies as a finished product that's actually going to pass the regulatory compliance needs of that local entity. The problem with digital transformations, on the other hand, is there's very little, if any, regulation or oversight of how those projects are managed. So when you think about a house, if you have a shaky foundation, or there's certain criteria that aren't met for safety purposes, or to accomplish whatever the goal of the house is, which is to provide shelter and to provide safety, then it's not going to pass code and it's not going to get approved, and the house won't ever finish or be sold. Going back to digital transformation, though, none of that compliance or verification exists in the marketplace. So you can't rely on the government to tell you how your digital transformation should work. So the question becomes, how do you validate that you're implementing the way it should be implemented, that you're mitigating risk, that you're avoiding the cost overruns, the time overruns, and all that stuff? And so we have to think creatively about how can we institute a similar sort of result as you would find in house building without necessarily getting the government involved. So how can you as an organization, in other words, provide the oversight and the verification compliance of how the digital transformation is going? And this is a role that companies like Third Stage can provide. That's a common service we provide to our clients, is using our quality assurance and implementation program management framework to help provide that sort of compliance and that sort of validation that the project is going to succeed and that you're adequately addressing the risks or the safety issues, if you will, of that digital transformation. So when you're defining your overall transformation, you want to make sure you've got those quality checkpoints in place and those overall validation and verification of the result that you're getting from your transformation. So I hope this has provided you some general guidance of how to think about your digital transformation differently in a way that most of us can relate to, especially in the context of something like a house, which again, you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. And that's the way we have to think about digital transformation, is how can we treat our digital transformation more like building a house? And if we do that, we're more likely to be successful. So that was how to construct a digital strategy, how digital strategy and the planning process is a lot like building a house, or should be a lot like building a house. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to shift gears and talk more specifically after a break. We're going to talk about what exactly implementation phase 0 is. We're going to talk about the different components of phase 0 and how it fits into your overall transformation, really just building on this last segment we just talked about. So stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company's called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys, including helping them with the program management and the project management of their implementations. So thank you for being here today. And today's topic is related to implementation planning. This is the implementation planning episode. And the next segment we want to talk about here in today's episode is to talk about what is implementation phase 0 and what do you need to know about it. So let's go ahead and roll the clip and we'll explain here in this next segment what phase 0 is. And when we're helping clients through their digital transformation journeys, one of the big things we do is we help them evaluate and select new software. And once we've helped them evaluate and select new software, we help them implement it. And one of the really fascinating things we noticed when organizations choose the technology is that the motivation and the morale and the excitement for the project is at an all-time high. People are really excited to just jump in and start working on this project that is surely going to improve their businesses and make their jobs easier. This is an understandable response to new technologies, but there's a step in between that organizations often forget, and that is phase 0 of the implementation. In other words, there's a phase that needs to be inserted between software selection and implementation to make sure that the organization's ready. And if an organization's not ready and they don't have their ducks in a row and they don't have a blueprint for what they want to be when they grow up, chances are very high that the project is ultimately going to fail, or at the very least, the organization is going to spend way too much time, way too much money, and way too much chaos and heartache on the project. So what I want to do today is unpack this phenomenon and talk about what phase 0 is, why it's so important, and what the different components of phase 0 are so that you can be better prepared and make better use of your technology investments. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well. Now, another resource I want to tell you about that'll help you understand this in more detail is our Phase Zero checklist. You can find that on our website, scan this QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. If you're an organization going through a digital transformation or an ERP implementation, and your executive team isn't all on the same page, or they don't have a clear vision of how this project is going to support their future direction, then I would suggest you're not ready to start the project. You shouldn't be starting the project. And the reason for that is it creates a lot of headwinds that work against you as a project team. Let's just assume you have an executive team of, say, 7 people. If you start on a project and those 7 people on the executive team have 7 different opinions of what they want this project to be and what they want the organization to look like in the future, that project is destined to fail. So what we have to do is make sure that we get the executives on the same page and that we get the project and the overall direction of the project on the same page with the executives. If we don't do that, then the project will run into problems later on, and that's going to end up costing you a lot more time and money than it would have taken you just to get this right up front. So one of the first things you could do in Phase Zero is make sure that you have strategic alignment, that you've taken the time to really focus on and articulate what the future direction of the company is and how exactly this project will support that future direction. And I'll just give you a couple examples here. Some of the examples of decisions that need to be made and agreed upon by the executive team would be things like, what are our overall goals and objectives for this project? In other words, what are those quantifiable, measurable results we expect from the project? How much do we want to standardize our business processes? Which parts of our business do we want to standardize? Which parts do we want to leave independent or decentralized? How much are we willing to change our business to fit the software versus changing the software to fit the business? These may sound like technical decisions or project management-based decisions, but these are decisions that have to be made by the executive team, or at least agreed upon by the executive team. And these aren't easy answers, by the way. There's a lot of trade-offs, a lot of pros and cons and risks to whatever decision you make, and so it takes time to work through that. But once you get alignment and you get everyone on the same page, now all of a sudden you've converted headwinds into tailwinds, and you can start your implementation. It's going to be a lot more successful. So make sure you have strategic alignment. That's one of the first steps in Phase Zero. One of the most common fallacies with digital transformation is that if you just pick the software and deploy the software, that will determine what your business processes are going to look like in the future. This is a very flawed assumption because today's modern technology is so flexible that there's a lot of different ways, a whole multitude of different ways that you can deploy that technology. And if you don't have a sense of what you want the technology to do, it's going to take you a lot of time making those decisions as a team while the meter's running and you're racking up time and cost and expense on the project. So it's really important that you have that sort of blueprint from a future state operating model and a future state business process perspective of what you want to look like. And I'm not suggesting here at this point that you go down to the micro level of detail of defining individual transactions and workflows and different screens you might use, because you may not know. This is new technology and there's only so much you know about the technology before you deploy it. So instead, what we need to do is start at that macro level, define what our end-to-end business processes are, what are the common business processes we might want to deploy throughout the organization. If we're an organization that's gone out and acquired through mergers and acquisitions, and we have 10 or 20 different ways of operating, we might need to take some time to decide what's that one way we're going to operate when we deploy technologies. Now, if you think about it, if we don't make those decisions up front, those decisions will take up a lot of time during implementation, and worse yet, it'll create a lot of resistance to change because now you're going to have people infighting and bickering over what that future state should be. So you want to get all that out on the table and work through that messiness early on. And again, by doing this and creating that operational blueprint, you're going to create exponentially more value and more efficiency and more cost reduction later on during your implementation than if you hadn't done that. So defining your future state business processes and operating model is a key part of Phase Zero. And to learn more about how to do this, how do you handle business process management within Phase Zero, I encourage you to check out this video on my YouTube channel that dives into business process management and how it works. You may have heard that organizational change management is one of, if not the most important reasons why digital transformations fail. but organizations commonly don't understand what change management is, or they assume that their organization is immune to resistance to change and other change issues. Because again, when you first start a project after you've selected technologies, there's this misleading perception that everyone's excited about the project, therefore change management won't be difficult. The reality is it is going to be difficult. It's going to be a lot more difficult than you expect. In fact, I have yet to meet a CIO or any project team member anywhere in the world for any client I've ever done work with that has said change management was easier than they thought, or that they've done enough change management through the project. Every single case or every single instance, even with clients we've worked with, have said they wish they would have spent more time on change management. So the question is, well, what do we do at this point in the project? We don't know what the changes are yet. We don't know what the business processes are going to look like necessarily, at least not at the detailed level. And we certainly aren't ready to start training or detailed communications or anything of that nature. What we can do is start to anticipate where the pockets of resistance are going to reside within the organization. And we also can start to assess how severe that resistance to change might be. And the way we do that is through an organizational readiness assessment, which involves two prongs. One is a quantitative anonymous employee survey. The other is a qualitative set of focus groups that together paint a picture of what the culture of the organization is, what some of the strengths and weaknesses of the organization are. And if you're skilled at doing this and you do this day in and day out like our team does at Third Stage, you'll know what some of those anticipated points of resistance are going to be, and you can create a change management strategy that really surgically targets those areas to proactively address those areas of resistance before they become unmanageable. Now, on the surface, if you ask employees if they're ready for change or if they're excited, chances are pretty high. Most, if not all of them, are going to say, yep, we're excited, we're ready, we understand. We don't like our current systems and our current processes, so we're craving new technologies. However, when you start to peel back the layers of the onion and you start to define how jobs are going to change and which jobs are going to have things taken away, which jobs might be automated or centralized, which spreadsheets might be taken away, all those things create resistance. And so we have to anticipate what those things are so that we can start to create a change plan around that. And that's why we want to do this organizational readiness assessment as part of Phase 0. And the final thing I'll say here is that organizational change management is typically on the critical path. In other words, it's resistance to change that elongates a project plan. So if we don't know what our change strategy is and how long it's going to take for our people to change, we don't have a realistic implementation plan. So in order for us to define a realistic implementation plan, which I'm going to come back to that point here in a minute, we need to understand what the change strategy is. Now, to learn more about change management and what it is and how it works, I encourage you to dive into this video right here. It's a detailed training video that I published on my YouTube channel that dives into organizational change management and some of the different components that you should be aware of. Or if you prefer to read more about change management, you can download our guide to organizational change management by scanning this QR code right here or via the links below. Now, once we have strategic alignment, we've defined our future state business processes, we've done the organizational assessment so that we can create a change strategy. Now we need to look at what the program management strategy is. How are we, the organization, not our outside consultants, but how are we, the organization, going to manage this project in the overall program? And when I say program, I mean not just the technical project, I mean the entire program. So yes, you're going to hire software vendors and implementation technical partners that will do the technical pieces of things. But you also need to have a change management team, a process improvement team, an architecture and data and integration team. You might have multiple technologies that you're deploying, so that might mean you have multiple technology projects that you're managing. That should all feed up into an overall program that you manage and you have a strategy for. In addition to having an overall program strategy and plan, you also want to make sure you have the right governance and controls in place, the right risk mitigation measures, the things that allow you to manage the project from a business and technology and people perspective, and also allows you to manage your third-party vendors as well. Now, note that I'm not suggesting that your implementation technology partner do that for you. They can't do that for you. They can manage the technical work stream, but only you are well equipped to manage that entire program, and you should have that ownership within your organization. Now, my team here at Third Stage, we commonly will help clients build out their program management capabilities and advise them along the way and really act as an extension of their program management team. But in general, you want to ultimately own that yourselves. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the difference between program management, project management, and how to structure an entire program, I encourage you to check out this video on my YouTube channel right here where I whiteboard out what a program is and how that's different from project management. Now, you may be wondering, why have we not talked about implementation planning? What's the actual implementation plan and why are we waiting this long to do it? First of all, I'll say that none of this is really sequential that I'm talking about. A lot of this will happen in parallel. But everything I've talked about so far in this video now should ultimately feed into and influence the overall implementation plan. And now that we know what the processes are going to look like and the magnitude of change with those processes and how well aligned we are as an organization, what our change strategy is, now that we know all that stuff, now we can create an implementation plan. Now you may also be wondering, well, my software vendor already gave me an implementation plan. Why would I do that now? Yes, they did give you an implementation plan as part of their proposal, most likely, but it's also highly, highly likely that it's unrealistic, doesn't have realistic assumptions, and doesn't fit your unique needs. And the other part of that is they probably just gave you a project plan for the technical work stream, not the overall program that includes the business process and the people aspects of the transformation. So for that reason, you need to take all these things we've talked about from phase 0 and use that as a way to create the overall implementation plan, which can use the software vendor's implementation plan as an input, but you've got to add a lot of stuff to that, a lot of other activities that weren't included in their plan, and a lot of new assumptions that might be more realistic for your organization. Now, my final component of phase 0 planning is the business case and the benefits realization plan. This is where you really refine and fine-tune the business value and the quantifiable business benefits you expect to get out of the project. It's where you refine the overall cost of the project because you probably didn't know what the real costs were until you went through this phase 0 exercise. And it's where you also define what the business benefits are and the benefits realization plan. So we've talked about not just business benefits to justify the investment in the project, but we want to convert that business case into a benefits realization plan that has a detailed plan of how we're going to achieve those benefits, which modules or process improvements or job changes are going to enable that business value. And that's going to allow us to do two things. One is it's going to allow us to ensure that after we deploy new technology, we go back to that benefits realization plan and look at how we're doing and how we're tracking so that we can make improvements and optimize our implementation to maximize the value we get from our investment. But even shorter term and more fundamental is that during the implementation, that business case and benefits realization plan is going to help us make a lot of decisions that we might not otherwise be able to make. In other words, if we have questions around scope or whether or not we should customize or whether or not we should increase the budget of the project, we're going to be making that decision in a vacuum if we don't have a business case and benefits realization plan to go back to say, here's the business value that we do or don't get if we do or don't invest additional funds or additional time, additional modules, et cetera. So the business case and benefits realization plan is a great way to provide sort of the guardrails for the overall project to ensure that we have that North Star to make the right decisions that are going to add the most value to our organization. So that was an overview from my YouTube channel about what implementation phase 0 is and how it can and should fit into your overall digital transformation. I also want to get into, in our next segment, more about implementation planning, some of the things that you need to do more specifically in phase 0 as part of that planning process. First, we're going to take a quick break, though. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting, and I want to invite you to join our annual tech agnostic conference called Digital Stratosphere. Digital Stratosphere is a conference that features some of the industry's brightest minds, greatest thinkers, and it's a great opportunity to network with peers, other industry people, other CIOs, other project team members that are going through digital transformations or ERP implementations. We've got a great lineup of speakers this year. It's a 3-day event, a lot of great entertainment, networking opportunities. I'll be there as one of the keynote speakers along with some of my favorite speakers in the industry as well, both within Third Stage Consulting but also outside the company as well. So I encourage you to check it out and learn more. You can go to stratosphere2024.com to learn more about the event. You can see the agenda, the way it's shaping up, and you can see some of the past testimonials of people that have attended. And the event is October 2nd through the 4th, 2024. It's going to be based in Denver, Colorado, downtown Denver, beautiful downtown Denver in the fall, which is a great time to visit Denver if you haven't been. Again, stratosphere2024.com. Check out the agenda. Check out our early bird pricing for passes. And the other beautiful things, if you can't be here in person in Denver, which we hope you can, but if you can't, you can also join remotely as well. We have virtual passes available as well, so you're able to join from wherever in the world you might want to join from. So stratosphere2024.com, check it out, and I hope to see you there.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control episode number 187, aka the Implementation Planning episode, the Digital Transformation Phase 0 episode. So we're covering everything related to implementation planning and Phase 0 of digital transformations and ERP implementations. And in this next segment, we want to provide an overview of what project planning is, we'll provide sort of an intro to project planning. So with that being said, let's roll the clip here. This is an intro to project planning.
Before I dive into this, just a real quick reminder, how many of you are either in the midst of a transformation right now or you're about to start one? Okay, and just keep your hands up for a second if you don't mind. Of those of you with your hands up, how many of you are ready for it, or you feel like the organization's ready? Sort of ready. How about that? You're sort of, you're like in between.
How about not ready at all?
How about not ready at all? Who do you feel? All right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of a good mix there of some are ready, some not so ready. And the reality is just to be candid, no organization is ever ready, and you never feel 100% comfortable to move forward. So the key here today of what we want to talk about is how do we get ready enough to put ourselves in a good position for success. And the other thing I want to delineate too is that when we talk about implementation readiness, that's different than go live readiness, and that's something that comes later on as we're in the midst of an implementation. There comes a point where we have to do a series of checkpoints that would say, are we ready to go live? Are we ready to flip the switch and turn off the old system? All that good stuff. So this is very different. This is completely different than go live readiness. This is just, are we ready to start implementing? And what oftentimes industry people will try to suggest is, and you think about it from, again, I always try to empathize with where people are coming from and understanding human behavior of why things happen the way they do with human interactions. But if I'm a software vendor or system integrator, I want you to feel as ready as possible so you will just sign the damn contract and help me get the software sale and help me get the services sold or whatever the case may be. So that's the pressure you feel typically as an organization that's getting ready to move forward. And one of the big dynamics we see is that companies move too quickly from the time they make a decision on software, they sign their contracts, and they are going 100 miles an hour or 100 kilometers per hour, depending on where you're from. At full speed ahead. And during that time, there's critical decisions and planning that doesn't happen, that should happen, but it's too late. We're already rolling, and the momentum tends to get out of control, and it can be hard to contain. So that's the dynamic we want to talk about: is what is that period, that critical period between the time we've decided or come close to deciding what our software and preferred technology roadmap is, until we actually start deploying it, and what do we need to do during that critical moment in time. So some of the common challenges is that companies will pick the technology, they're riding a wave of momentum. People are generally pretty excited about the path forward. The project team is excited because they've got clarity around what we're going to do. We finally have a plan to replace our old crappy systems and processes. Hopefully we've got budgetary approval and executive approval to move forward, and we're ready to roll. So that the excitement level is typically the highest at that point in the project. Usually that's as high as the momentum and the excitement's going to get. I hate to break that to you, but that's usually the peak excitement level. What happens over time is it tends to drop, and there's a lot of challenges that come along with that. But at that moment in time, we are blinded by optimism and excitement, and we oftentimes don't make the right decisions and don't take the time to have a proper plan to move forward in a way that makes sense for us as an organization. And there's a lot of blind spots that come along with that, and that's what we'll talk about. One of the common things here too is because we're excited, we've signed the contract, and we don't know a better solution, we will typically delegate the transformation to the system integrator, the vendor, the VAR, whoever you're working with to do the technical implementation. We'll delegate a lot of this work to them, and they will tell us, let's go ahead and get started. Let's start the workshops next week, and let's just start building stuff, and so we can design it, build it, test it, all that good stuff. And what oftentimes happens during these early stages too is these unrealistic expectations get baked in that critical moment from the time we selected software until we start moving forward. And once those unrealistic expectations are baked, they're extremely hard to change. And I've seen a lot of clients that will set a date or a budget number that gets baked into set in stone, and there's no backing off of that number. And that's an example of what we often see early in a process. So one of the terms I often use with clients, and our team has started to adopt this nomenclature as well, and I don't know where it came from. It just is a visual. I'm a very visual person, so everything has to relate to an analogy or a visual in some way for me to understand it. But I see a lot of clients that are what we call cliff diving, or what I think of as cliff diving. You're on the edge of a cliff, and it's just, doesn't matter how deep it is, doesn't matter if you've got a parachute or not, or the right equipment, just jump. Just trust us, jump, and you're going to be fine. And trust us, it's that kind of thing. So that cliff diving phenomena of where we pick the software and we're just going to dive right in and start doing stuff, it seems innocuous enough, it seems harmless, it seems like the right thing to do, but there's so many bad decisions or unresolved decisions that materialize during that critical step. And so what ends up happening is we start the project without clear operational direction. System integrator takes control of the project, largely because we don't have a solid plan or a clear direction of what we want out of this project. So the system integrator, by default, and in the absence of a better answer, is going to define that for us. This is a really common one. I think I alluded to this yesterday in one or two of the sessions, but a lot of times the decisions that need to be made are being made with the pressure of a meter running. There's a meter running on the consultants, and however many of them there are times whatever rate they're charging. That's a pretty expensive decision-making process that suddenly we're backed into. And the reality of it is that we should have made those decisions before we ever engaged the system integrator, but because we were told that we should bring the system integrator on now, that tends to be the dynamic that a lot of companies fall into. So one of two things happens here. Either we rush into a decision that we don't have alignment on, or is just not a good decision for the organization, or we slow things down and we take our time to make the decision, but it gets really expensive because we're paying by the hour while everyone waits for us to make these decisions. And so those are the two not so attractive choices we have in those types of situations. It often leads us to the technology driving the business rather than the business driving the technology. So the less we have a clear vision of what we want this project to be and what we want the project to accomplish for us, the more technology will fill that void for us, and technology will determine for us how we're going to operate. Not always a bad thing, as we've talked about before. There are certain processes that's okay, where the technology should define for us how we can make it better, but there are certain things that we need the process to drive the technology, either because it's really important to us or different for us as an organization, or because the software is so flexible that there are so many options and ways we could be deploying the technology that we need to define what makes the most sense for us. It's pretty rare that you have one answer on how a process or workflow should look in a system, even for something as basic as accounts payable or creating a purchase order, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made around that, and the better clarity we have around what we want the business to look like in the future, the better off we'll be. Leads to more time and money than we need to spend on a project. The team gets frustrated when we jump in and we start exposing some of the misalignment, and the challenges start to come out on the surface in a more dramatic way, a more expensive way, and a riskier way, which leads to morale issues with the project. Oftentimes it's too much for the business to absorb all at once, and that leads to oftentimes a lack of internal ownership and buy-in. So these are just some of the symptoms that we see, or some of the challenges that stem from rushing ahead, even though, again, it's understandable why at that point when we're excited, we've signed the contracts, we might even have a deadline for when we need to be off our old system, which further exacerbates the problem. A lot of times companies know that they've got to be off by X date because the vendor's sunsetting the old technology, or they're going to stop supporting or whatever. That makes it even worse, because then we feel like we have to just start doing stuff. And the reality is, if we were to take a step back and get a plan in place, it feels like we're going slow, but we're actually speeding things up later on because we're aligned, we're a fine-tuned project machine that has a clear direction, and therefore we're going to roll out faster. So that's the hard part, is balancing how much time do we spend up front and how much can we tolerate and stomach the fact that it feels like we're going slow, but in reality we're speeding things up because we've got better alignment and clearer direction. So this is a whiteboard presentation I did, and I just haven't gotten around to putting this into a PowerPoint format, so I took a picture of the whiteboard. And so in the interest of time, this is what we have to work with right now, is this slide. So this is a presentation I gave around SAP, and you could forget SAP for a minute, apply any software vendor in its ecosystem, and this would apply. So SAP is a good example because it's probably the biggest, most extreme example. They're the biggest software vendor in the ERP space. They've created a big ecosystem that is paid by and supported by SAP, the big system integrators, the user groups within SAP, industry analysts like Forrester, Gartner, those guys, solo consultants that have grown up in the SAP space, and they're drinking the SAP Kool-Aid, and that's all they know is the SAP world. There's this whole ecosystem that's been built as sort of a machine to convert as many customers as possible to their new, whatever their new platform of the day is. Today it happens to be S4HANA. They've created this 2025 deadline to switch over to S4HANA. I doubt they'll stick to that, but as of right now, they're saying 2025 is the date that all SAP customers need to switch to HANA. If you're not an SAP customer and you're going to buy the software now, you're pretty much getting S4HANA. You don't really have a choice to go look at ECC or R3 or one of the legacy products because they're not going to be supporting it for much longer, and they're not selling it aggressively right now. So that's one of the biases that's created by this ecosystem. Another bias is that everything is kind of an SAP first type of mentality. So let's figure out how to make SAP, in this case, work for the client. But again, it's not just SAP, it's any ERP vendor that would apply to. The concept of best practices further perpetuates the problem because there's the industry best practices that they're marketing that people like and they want to hear that we talked about yesterday. They're using the agile approach as a way to get started quickly. If we use an agile approach, we can just bite off this little piece of our deployment, start it now, which makes the readiness problem even worse because now we've honed in on one tiny little subset of our big transformation and we don't have a clear vision for this, but now we're just going to start doing stuff over here without having a sense of how it all ties together. So all these things lead to a bias and leads to, this is what customers hear. This is all they're really hearing in the space right now is this stuff. So again, in the absence of any better information, or if you don't know any better, that's what you're being told by all these different parties, and they're very aligned in their messaging. If you talk to any one of these parties, you're going to hear a very common, consistent message. And SAP and the big vendors especially are very good at crafting a very clear message that the entire ecosystem supports. Even just down to the nomenclature they use, like SAP uses, for example, digital core is something they use right now. It's their digital core, which to me is an excuse for the rest of the stuff's not done yet, so let's just focus on the digital core, and then we'll worry about that other stuff like manufacturing and all that those pesky details of our software. We'll figure that stuff out later.
Sounds really strong.
It does, like digital core. It's like
We've got it.
it's agile. It's we're getting the core. All right. So then what ends up happening here is that the executive team, and we've kind of segment a customer into two layers. You've got the executive team who is hearing all this stuff here, and they usually believe this stuff. I mean, because again, it's the stuff that executives want to hear, is that it's SAP can handle everything, or ERP can handle everything. We've got best practices. We use Agile. We can get this done for you quickly. That's all the stuff we want to hear. So they're buying this. We're down here stuck with what's being handed to us as a project team, which is we have an unrealistic timeline. We don't have anything that's tailored for us. We haven't figured out how we're going to fill in the gaps of what the system integrator, the vendor, can't do and what those risks are. We don't have the proper oversight of the system integrator, and that's what we're inheriting. So right now, you start a project, and we're kind of backed into a corner with these unrealistic expectations that have come in from the top, and now we're stuck deploying something that was never realistic. So not to paint a completely dire, dark picture, but that's the reality of what a lot of project teams get stuck with and how they get boxed into a tough situation. So a lot of what we try to do with our clients is, first of all, educate the executive team, because it all starts here, as we talked about for those of you that were in the executive alignment session this morning. So much of this starts with getting the executives aligned and having realistic expectations and understanding what it is we're trying to accomplish and forcing them to make the decisions and the trade-offs that they have to make at the executive level so that we as a project team can support those clear decisions that they have made, not the project team. And so that's a very important differentiator that we try to help our clients through. So when we look at what causes a project to take a certain amount of time and money and risk, there's a few different layers. We have the software, the technology, and everything that goes along with the technology, like the system integrator, the implementation partners, your internal team that's supporting the project. They're all enabling an overall transformation that involves 4 major layers. You have the technical piece, which is just one of it, but then the rest of it is your processes, your people, and then just your overall business, what your business needs are. So what ends up happening, though, is a lot of times we make decisions or plan for just a technical implementation, but we haven't accounted for all the business, operational, and people side of things that are typically the things that are going to determine how long the project takes, how much it's going to cost, and how much risk there inevitably is. It's generally not as related to the technology, although the caveat to that is in today's transitionary stage that we're in right now, where technology for a lot of vendors is transitioning to the cloud, technology is also more of an issue now than it was 5 years ago, because we're now dealing with immature products that aren't fully developed and they're not fully baked. And even once they are fully baked, which I don't know when that will be, but in a couple years I'm sure they will be more fully baked than they are now. Now we've got to worry about how they integrate, all these different solutions integrate together. Like with SAP, for example, or Infor, even Microsoft Dynamics has more of an acquisition strategy where they've gone out and acquired all these different vendors. Now we've got to figure out how do those solutions tie together. How does S4HANA integrate with Ariba and Concur and SuccessFactors and all these different solutions they've bought? That's a whole nother thing that we've got to deal with. So there's a lot of work to do before technology is mature to where it was, even just 5 years ago. It's going to take a few years to get these massive overhauls of the technology to the point we need to be. So technology is a risk, but the bigger risk are the process, the people, and the business side of things. And more often than not, we're overly focused on the technology piece. The things that have the biggest impact, now, when we're helping a client define how long is my project going to take, if I know the average for companies of all different sizes, different geographies, different industries, if I know the average is 18 months, which is about what it is for across the board, which is a very rough average with a lot of variation in that data, the average is 18 months. The way I know how to apply that average to me or to move that up or down is based on a number of different factors. One is certainly our company size, which is usually an easy one to scale that duration up or down. But then we also look at the degree of process change we're going through. Is this a big change for us, or is this more of an incremental improvement? Those are 2 very different implementation durations, so we have to know which path we're going down. How capable are our people? What's our level of maturity with the current capabilities? Is this going to be a situation where they're using an AS400 and a lot of really manual processes, and now we're going to Microsoft Dynamics or Oracle, one of those systems with AI and machine learning and all this stuff? That's a huge jump, as opposed to a company that just implemented a relatively new ERP system 10 years ago, not a current, the most ideal situation, but not as much of a change as one that's been on the same system for 30 years. So we have to understand how big of a jump is this for people, how big of a change is this for technology. Are we going from an old version of AX to D365? That's a different jump than going from AS400 to D365. Those are 2 very different situations in terms of our ability to support and build that competency from a technology and IT perspective. So this is more focused on the IT capability. These 2 are more focused on the process and people capability across the whole business. And then we look at the geography, how many locations we have. Are we expanding the scope of what ERP means in the future versus what it is today? Is it going to be more integrated than what the solution is we have now? That adds a layer of complexity. How much experience does our internal team have with implementation experience? So if we have a subset of people on the team that have worked at other companies that have been through implementations, that internal knowledge is really important. You can always bring in outside support from people like us or your system integrator, but the more internal in-house knowledge you have around that, the better, because that's usually, it helps make it less likely that you're going to reject that outside perspective, if that makes sense. A lot of times if no one has any experience, we come in with what the reality is going to look like, and you reject it because it just doesn't resonate, it doesn't make sense because you've never been through it before, and everything you're being told by the ecosystem is completely different than what the reality is you're being told by others. So only by having by having that internal experience, it helps, validate the reality of what outside, third parties, independent third parties might provide to you.
Do clients, are they pretty good at evaluating that, or are they sometimes way off?
Evaluating this whole thing?
No, the internal experience piece. It's like, do they think they have one thing and it's another, or?
No, usually they're pretty good. I mean, usually they know. I mean, if it's a highly tenured staff and most people have only been through the implementation from 30 years ago, but never outside, they usually kind of know that, yeah, we don't have a lot of experience. But if it's a high growth company or there's been some attrition and you've brought in some people that's, new blood that has seen other situations, I think they generally have a good sense for the most part. So implementation readiness, what is it we're trying to accomplish as part of our transformation readiness approach? First is executive alignment. I have a whole session on that this morning around how do we get that strategic and executive alignment. If you weren't in that session, check out the slides. If you were in it, this will all tie back to that session from this morning. Operational readiness is another piece that we look at, which is how do we define our business processes and scenarios that we want to make sure that we have built into the system. And again, we're not talking here in the operational readiness, we're not talking about how to define the processes to a level of detail that is dependent on the technology. It's more, this is how we do business, regardless of what technology we use, this is how we interact with customers and stakeholders, and here's what we expect to see from a process flow and a data flow and how decisions are made. And we need to have that clarity and understanding of the different scenarios and exceptions so that we can have a clear blueprint for what it is we want the technology to do for us. Now, inevitably, there is going to be reconciliation that needs to happen between the technology we choose when we go to implement it, and that's okay. That we can reconcile that. But a lot of times vendors will say, no, don't worry about mapping or mapping out what you do today, because our best practices will define that for you. That's a bad idea, and it sounds like it's not a bad idea because you avoid the need to have to reconcile anything on paper at least. But the reality is there's going to be a lot worse than reconciliation, which is now you've got a system that doesn't fit what it is you need, and your people are going to reject the system because we haven't defined the technology in the context of how we need the business to operate. So it's one of those things that sounds good, we want to hear it, and it sounds like we don't want to reconcile or waste a lot of time on defining our business processes, which we don't want to overdo it. There is a fine line. You don't want to spend too much time on analysis paralysis and mapping out every possible scenario in a ton of detail, but you do want to have a general sense of what your business processes look like and what you want your future state to be so that we can better define how the technology can support that going forward.
Yeah, good question. So, if you've cut limited resources, are you better off just focusing on the to-be process rather than the as-is? Because you could spend a huge amount of time with an organization that's quite mature trying to work out what the as-is is. But really, you're just interested in what the future state is, or do you have to do both?
Well, you don't have to do both, but I've found that it's a lot more effective to do both for two reasons. One is because in order to get to the to-be, me as a person that's used, all I know is the as-is. I don't know the to-be yet. I can't start with a clean slate and define what I want without first defining what do I do today, why am I doing these things that I do, what are the pain points, and what should I be changing to help morph into that future state. So you don't want to spend a huge amount of time complaining about the processes and overanalyzing every single little broken detail, but there is some value in doing a limited amount of as-is to help us get to the future state. The other reason why the as-is is really important is because, we'll talk about this in the next session, from a change management perspective, we have to understand the gap between how things are today in order to connect the dots for people to get them to the future. So at some point we're going to have to do it. We could start with the to-be, and let's just say that part goes fine, and we're able to do that with a clean slate without worrying about the current state. In order to do change management effectively, you still have to go back to the current state to understand, well, how's that different, and how are we going to bring people along, and who's going to be impacted, and how do we get Susie to understand her new role in this future state. So from a change perspective, it's really important too. Sure. There's technical readiness. One thing that we try to advise a lot of our clients on is, as much as we can, let's start to build an internal competency. Let's do it right now. We don't have to wait till we hire a system integrator even. Let's start figuring out how we can train as much of our IT staff as we can on the technology we're about to deploy. So if we're about to deploy N4, Epicor, whatever the software is, let's find some ways to get them trained on it, either through the vendor or third-party training, to build that competency so that we're more educated and we know more and can make informed decisions and be on equal footing with the system integrator or the implementation partner, rather than the implementation partner having all the knowledge around how the technology works. And because we don't know any better, we just defer to what the vendor would do. And so that's a really important point, and it also builds a much more sustainable level of competency within the organization if we start from the day one on building that competency in-house. It's easy to say, well, we're not experts, why would we try to learn it when we could just hire the system integrator? Just trust me when I say there's a lot of value in learning as much as you can about the technology. Even if all you do is learn how the software works, you get trained on the configuration tools, the integration tools, the customization tools. The more you know in your IT group about that stuff, the more informed they will be to be able to be a part of the solution and owning parts of the solution rather than just the system integrator owning it. And one thing that having been part of a system integrator from early in my career and having worked with a number of them in the years since, one thing about big system integrators, it's almost like the Wizard of Oz. It's a kind of a big black box that, don't look behind the curtain. We will bring you the solution, and we don't want you looking behind the curtain and being collaborative in how that's developed. Now, on paper, they'll tell you, you're going to we'll work with one of your functional leads alongside with one of our functional leads. But the reality is they're just drawing out of that person what they need, and they'll go away and build whatever they're going to build, and then they'll come back, you'll test it, you'll tell them it works or it doesn't, and then they'll go fix it, and then they'll come back and they'll train you. And so that dynamic needs to change to where you're part of that and you're going behind the curtain and you're part of that solution. They may not want you to, but again, it's your project, and you need to have ownership and visibility into what's going on if you want it to be successful, especially in the longer term. People readiness, change management, we're going to talk about that in the next session, so I won't dive into that in too much detail right now. But the idea here is that it's never too early to start change management. There's always something we can be starting now. What that is, I'll talk about in the next session, but there's an assessment that we recommend doing early in the project that will help determine what that is you should be doing. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. I can't tell you that if you're about to start an implementation, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. All I can tell you is you should be doing an assessment to figure out how severe the potential resistance to change is going to be, where the change management issues and risks are going to be, so that we can start developing a change management plan that becomes part of the overall implementation plan. And until we have a good change management plan, we don't really have a good implementation plan, because the change management plan, more often than not, will drive the duration and the cost of the implementation plan. So a lot of times companies just want to wait and deal with that later, but if we do that, all of a sudden we've created a big problem, because now we're forcing ourselves, we're boxing ourselves in and predefining how much time we do or don't have for change management, when in fact that usually takes longer than the actual technical work stream itself. And then project governance, getting the right project governance in place so that you, the organization, not the software vendor, not the system integrator, not third stage, not your independent consultants, none of them should be owning the governance. You guys should be. You can be taking inputs from people like us or your system integrator, but ultimately it's your project governance, and you determine how decisions get made. It's easy to say that look at recommendations from other system integrators. It's easy to take that and just say we're going to deploy their project governance, but usually their project governance is very weak. So having something that helps identify risks objectively, whether it makes the third parties and the consultants look bad or not, is very important, because we need to know what they are so that we can mitigate them along the way. So the whole idea with implementation readiness is we want to optimally engage with the system integrator. We want to be partners with them. We want to be on even footing. We don't want to be, by default, lacking knowledge that causes us just to have a sense of helplessness. I mean, that's what ends up happening with a lot of companies. Is they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the time, so they just kind of defer to the system integrator, and it creates this learned helplessness to where the system integrator can never go away. I mean, if the system integrator goes away, it becomes very painful and disruptive to the business, and they know it too. So the system integrators know that you're becoming dependent on them, and it may sound good in theory that they'll transfer all the knowledge to you eventually and they'll roll off, but typically what happens is you plan on that, but they end up staying at a high level of engagement for a lot longer than you expect, because you didn't have the right level of engagement and ownership and knowledge and things that are required to support the project effectively. And this is especially true if the system integrator creates your processes and your technology in a way that's misaligned with what your needs are, which is highly likely because you weren't involved or as involved in the decision making and the processes as you should have been. And so that creates even more reliance and dependency on the system integrator, because now they've got to fix and refine and pivot and do all the agile, in the name of agile, they're going to go fix all the stuff that wasn't right the first time. So that sort of thing is another dynamic to watch out for. So this is something that's very important to show. This is something we actually show when we're suggesting to clients how we would work with them. And the reason I show this is because even when we're recommending how if someone's considering us third stage as a company to work with them, we always put the client at the top. I mean, you guys are in charge of this. We are here to support, and we will be an extension of your team. We'll provide, be co-responsible with you. We'll provide tools and knowledge and advice and recommendations, but ultimately you decide. I mean, you're making the decisions on what it is you do and don't do, what kind of risk you're willing to take. We advise you on the risk trade-offs, and you decide. We'll give you the recommendations, and ultimately you decide. And probably the one thing that, having been a consultant my whole career, the thing I like least about being a consultant is that sometimes my recommendations don't matter, or sometimes they don't become reality because it's not my business, and I have the luxury of being outside looking in, and I can play armchair quarterback, but only you as a client can understand the internal political dynamics and constraints and resource realities that you have. All I can do is tell you what I think you should do, and ultimately the client decides. So that's the one thing I don't like about being a consultant, but it is the reality, and it's a very important reality, because if any of these parties were making all the decisions for you, or you were taking every recommendation that's made to you from a third party, you don't really own it. You're just you're just stamping off whatever someone else tells you. So it's important to have that dynamic in place. And then the system integrator would typically do all the things they do, which is the more technical expertise, the functional configuration, the testing, all that good stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that system integrators don't do or don't do well that you want to make sure you do to fill in the gaps, whether it's change management or data migration or overall program management to manage other third-party integrations or whatever the case may be. Typically that's outside the wheelhouse of the system integrator, and a lot of our clients don't want the system integrator to own everything. There's some value in breaking that up and having hedging a bit and having multiple parties potentially support that. And this is especially true if you are going with a solution that's not all in on one ERP system. So you might have one ERP system and a separate HCM or CRM or MES system, whatever it is, and that's okay. I mean, it's okay to have that. It's not a bad thing to have a best-of-breed approach, but if that is the case, you need someone to manage all the different moving parts throughout a transformation like that. So some of the components of implementation readiness, this is a lot of detail here, and this is something I'm going to cover tomorrow morning in the digital strategy session. But generally, just to summarize this in advance of tomorrow's presentation, where we'll get into this in more detail, this is the whole process that we recommend clients to go through, or at least the tools that are available to go through to get to a decision on what is our roadmap, what technology are we going to deploy, or technologies are we going to deploy, how are we going to do it, how are we going to account for the cost and the risks and the benefits, all that good stuff. And it gets us to a point here where we've got a decision, we've got a general roadmap, and now we need to figure out from this point forward, what do we do? We don't want to just jump straight into implementation. There's a phase here that we need to define. We may not know what it is, and that's what we'll talk about here in the next few slides. So I'm going to actually go a little bit out of order here. So this slide is that next phase. So once we've finished the digital strategy, which is over here on the left, the slide we just reviewed, now we get into this whole implementation readiness phase, which generally there's 5 things that we recommend clients focus on, or at least 5 work streams that we recommend clients focus on. One is that strategic and executive alignment piece, which I discussed earlier today in more detail, which is making sure that we have a clear vision for what this project is. We're making clear decisions at the executive level and having clear ownership at the executive level, so that by the time the project team inherits this project and moves forward with executing the project, it's done so in a way that's aligned with the way the executives want the project to look and the decisions that they need to make to support the business and the project going forward. So strategic and executive alignment, this also includes education, so making sure that executives understand what this project means and what the trade-offs are, and we've started to identify and neutralize or mitigate some of the misunderstandings or the myths that executives oftentimes have, or misconceptions they often have about these types of implementations. We've started to mitigate some of those challenges during this phase as well. The operational readiness, that's the piece I talked about before, which is just unpacking it a little bit more, which is now we're defining some of our business processes in more detail than others. Generally, the more strategic business processes are ones that we do want to spend some time defining the current into the future state so that we have a clear vision and blueprint for what the system and the technology and the new processes need to support. And again, we're not getting into transactional details of what buttons you push and what screens you use because we're not there yet. We're not designing software. We're defining what our business processes are and making sure that the software can fit within those business processes. People readiness, which is the change management. I'd say the biggest things that are the most important here are first of all to do this readiness assessment, which we call it a people readiness or organizational readiness assessment, where we do an assessment, this quantitative online survey and qualitative focus groups that identifies and measures the culture of the company, the magnitude of change they're about to go through, and identifies potential points of resistance or areas that are bound to be problems for that client to deploy new technology. And so the reason we do that is because that's going to formulate and be an input into our change management plan so that we have a strategy and a plan that's specific to us and specific to the things that we identified in the readiness assessment. And then the second piece that's really important at this point in the project is to start identifying organizational role design and the impacts that we're going to see as a result of a new deployment. Usually, even before we start building the software, we already kind of know that there's some major changes. There's some low-hanging fruit of changes that we know are going to happen organizationally. It might be that that we know we're going to centralize certain processes, or we're going to move to a shared services model, or that we know we're going to operate in a common platform across different departments or locations, and we're not doing that today. So that we know those areas are going to be more impacted, and change is going to be harder for those groups than other groups where maybe it's not as big of a change. So we've started to identify the change impacts at a work group level, at a location level, departmental level, that sort of thing. And then on the technical readiness piece, tomorrow, Daryl from Validatum is going to talk about data cleansing and mapping. So that is one that we recommend that you start earlier than later. This ends up on the critical path of most implementations that we're involved with, the whole data piece of it. So the sooner you can start, even though we aren't ready to start mapping and moving data over yet because we haven't even started building the software yet or configuring the software yet, we can, though, start assessing the data we have and figuring out what is our plan in parallel with the rest of the project to clean that data, eventually map that data, figure out our strategy for what we're going to bring over or not. The sooner we can start that, the better, because this so often gets pushed out to the very end. It's almost like, oh yeah, we're about to finish up testing, but we haven't figured out the data thing. So let's go see what we can do with the data and bring over some sample data, and then you realize, well, data's a mess and data doesn't quite map the way we want it to, and now we've created a delay because data hasn't been addressed early enough on. She can explain that a lot better than I can, so I'm going to stop there on the data cleansing piece, but that is an important part of the technical readiness. And we actually, when you hear her speak tomorrow, if you haven't already heard her speak, she and her company act as and are the data migration arm of Third Stage. So when we have a project where there's data needs, her team is that team underneath our umbrella. So that's the level of specialization that's required there and is very important. And then there's also the other piece of this is the architecture and the overall integration plan. So really understanding what systems are we keeping, what systems are going away, of the ones that are staying, or the ones that we're bringing in that are third party, not our core ERP, but third party systems we're deploying. How is this all going to tie together? What's our integration plan? What's the integration and test plan and all that good stuff that goes along with it? So this technical readiness piece is very important to figure out what this all looks like instead of just going and building core ERP without figuring out or understanding how the rest of it's going to tie together. We need to have a plan for how that's all going to integrate. And then having that project governance in place is extremely important. Those are some of the activities that we identify early on. And generally we advise that if you haven't identified a laundry list of risks already by the time you start your implementation, something's wrong. You're missing something because there's always risks, even at the point you start the project. A lot of times companies think, well, how could we have risk yet? We haven't even started. Well, you should by that point. There should be a lot of risk that you're recognizing in terms of not problems, but just things that are going to be challenging or things that are unique to you that you know are going to be a challenge from a change perspective or a technology perspective, whatever the case may be.
Barry, in the case where they've selected the SI and they've already got the SI involved, how much overlap? I mean, does the SI fight you for some of this stuff?
I wouldn't say they fight us for it, but they don't necessarily want it to happen. And there are some things that they'll claim to do. A lot of these things they'll say, well, we're going to do business processes, as part of our future state workshop, so you don't need to worry about that. Strategic executive alignment, we have some stakeholder plans, and that's part of our change management plan. We'll do that during change management later on. So that's a lot of the kind of thing you hear, but it's not this. We're not talking about deploying technology and stakeholder plans for deploying technology. We're talking about just getting aligned on what this project means. And if you've already engaged a system integrator by that point, you're a little too late. Not too late, but you're later than you should be. And it's never too late, though, to back up and say, okay, let's make sure we're all in sync before we continue going too far down that path. But they do, because of the independence, we're not there to sugarcoat anything. We're not there to sell more software or to, sell the bench of people in India that are going to be developing configuring the software. We have nothing to lose by recommending certain things. They have a lot to lose by hearing some of the messaging that comes out of this. So yes, there is a dynamic of pushback for sure on that. And that's okay. I mean, it's your project. Ultimately, the companies implementing have to decide what is best for them.
I was going to say, as an implementer, we go in, talking about project governance, we go in with risks. We've already started a risk plan, and sometimes they are surprised to see, what do you mean there's risks already? Well, we've identified risks as we've gotten to know, our clients and our prospects.
Do you do that as part of your, like the sales cycle, the business development cycle? So even before you've sold them, even before they've chosen you, you've already said.
Well, and we could be evaluating them at the same time. Our goal is to have successful implementations at the end of the day. So, we do a fair amount of evaluation up front. And so a big part of our internal handoff from sales to delivery is, hey, what are the risks that we've already identified as part of that? And then that flows directly into, the project governance conversations that we have, our PMs have with our clients. So, but it's interesting that the clients are surprised that there's already risk identified.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know about other implementers, but where I am, we are doing that. So
that's pretty rare, and partly because of the dynamic you described, which is clients aren't expecting it, and a lot of implementers and salespeople, I think, are afraid that hurts them to identify the risk, because now you've created some sort of doubt or uncertainty, and that's the last thing you want. You just want to close. I'm not saying you, but a salesperson oftentimes wants to close the deal, and so there's a perceived disruption to that end goal, which is to close the deal and move forward. So that's pretty rare, but it's good that you guys do. I think it's the right thing to do. I think people appreciate it. I mean, when they hear it, usually they appreciate knowing the risk because they wouldn't have otherwise known.
they haven't thought about it.
Yeah. The next few slides I won't dive into just because I'll let you read them, but each of these slides coincides with one of the 5 work streams here. So I kind of gave you a high-level overview of each of the 5, but then the next 5 slides dive into each of those work streams, talk about the kind of work streams we go through, the activities, the objectives you want to get out of that. So the idea here is we want to give you a framework that you could start to apply and use pieces of that you feel like might apply to your organization to help that readiness piece, or to enable that readiness piece. Generally, a lot of times companies will say, well, how long does this process take? And a lot of it depends on the size of the company and how ready they are and the level of maturity they're at. But generally, for a mid-sized to larger organization, it could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Generally, is where you get to that point where, okay, we've got a pretty solid springboard launching point. We're never 100% ready. We could always spend another 6 or 12 months, but at some point you get diminishing returns where you are delaying the project. But generally, in that 3 to 6 month range for most companies is kind of the time frame that gets you to a point where, okay, we feel we're not all the way there yet. There's a lot of stuff running in parallel that will continue on these paths, but at least we're a lot better off now than we were 90 days ago or 6 months ago, to where we can take ownership. We can own this. We can manage the system integrator, or at the very least be on even footing with the system integrator to be part of the decision making and really just know what we're getting ourselves into. Another part of this too, this is an important point I didn't really get into, which is mobilizing the change team and also just mobilizing the overall project team. A lot of times the team itself internally hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, but yet the system integrator is there. That's a huge problem. If your system integrator shows up before you've got the project team identified, that you're already off. I mean, you're already off track at that point, because now you're getting that much further behind where the system integrator is, and you'll never catch up to them because they inherently know more than you and are more experienced than you in this whole journey, and so you'll never catch up. So that's really important too, is to, you know, if you could slow things down and start to get caught up or at least get closer, you're just going to be more, the dynamic shifts at that point, you'll be more equipped to handle the project. There's a slide here that talks about the business process and the operational readiness piece, some of the things we look at when we're mapping that future state. And like I said, if you ever want to talk about how deep do we get, how do we figure out what processes we focus on or not, we have a whole framework I could share with you that helps explain that in more detail. Change management we'll talk about later in just a few minutes, and then you can see the rest of the slides here in more detail. So one last thing I'll share, and then I'll just see what questions you have before we take a break into the next slide, or the next session. And these are actually two slides that if you were in Stuart's QA session earlier today, you've seen these two slides before. If you weren't, these are new. So I'll go through them quickly just to not be overly redundant for those that weren't, or that were there. But having a quality assurance process in place early and getting that in place early during the implementation readiness phase is very important, because it gives you a project governance mechanism that allows you to do a lot of the things that I just talked about, which is to have control of your project, have good governance in place, manage your system integrator, be on even footing with the system integrator, all that stuff we've talked about so far. It also gives you a framework to identify the risks before they become problems. So really, you do want to be identifying risks before you see or feel the pain. If we wait until we see or feel the pain of the risk, then it's probably too late. We use that canary in the coal mine analogy of, coal miners used to have canaries in the mine, and the canaries are singing until they die, and then they realize that there's a gas leak that's killing the canaries, and they can get out before they die too. And again, not to be overly draconian or dramatic about it, but it is a good way to think about or visualize, the ways that we should be identifying the risk before we see the pain of it. Because if we see the pain of it, it's too late to effectively mitigate it before we get to our go live. And then there's a lot of other things I'll let you read here. But the whole idea here is this project QA framework can be used early on in the implementation readiness phase, and it's the same framework we use in expert witness engagements too. So when we're assessing and analyzing expert witness engagements, or if we're doing a project recovery from a failure, we use the same framework. In fact, we built the framework from those types of engagements, and then we pulled it forward and started using it as part of our QA early on in projects with clients. So it's very battle tested. The QA framework's been tested in some pretty extreme cases of extreme failure, and so the idea is if it's battle tested there in a failure, let's pull it forward and use it to identify the risks before they ever become huge problems. And so this is that overall QA framework that covers a lot of stuff, a lot of detail here. But if you look at just the headings in dark blue across the top here, these top two rows, these are all the different lenses that we typically will analyze and assess risk and identify issues and challenges to make sure we're staying on track and that we're mitigating the risks along the way as we go through the project. And you can see it ranges from everything from the initial procurement of the software and the contract T's and C's and a lot of the stuff that Marcus and Daniel talked about earlier today or yesterday, all the way through project governance, project management, resources, to the technical side of it, the organizational change, data, testing, security, et cetera. There's a lot of different lenses that you have to be looking at in these projects, and it's hard because a lot of times these projects are so big, they get structured in a way that's very siloed, and you don't have anyone that's kind of looking at the big picture and identifying all the different lenses or risks that you should be identifying, and doing it in a way that's objective, that's not meant to make anyone look bad, but it's also not trying to hide or bury risks. It's meant to bring them to the surface to where we can figure out how do we prioritize them, how do we address them. Some risks are more important than others. Some are low burn types of risks that they're there, but we're not going to deal with them yet, but we're just keeping an eye on them. Others are high priority showstoppers that we've got to deal with right away. So that's the whole idea here is drawing out that, using that quality assurance mindset early on in the implementation readiness to get conditioned for going through the implementation and being able to continue to identify those risks along the way.
That was an intro to project planning for my YouTube channel. Hopefully that's given you some good guidance on what it is you need to do to be successful in your digital transformation project, particularly in that planning phase, which is arguably the most important part of a project. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about as you plan for your transformation or ERP implementation initiative. We're going to bring on our guest here in just a moment, though. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to bring on Rachel from Setuply, and she's going to talk about project collaboration, onboarding a project team, and some of the things that you need to be thinking about as you get started on your transformation, really just in line with this whole implementation planning theme that we've been talking about here today. So stick around. We'll be right back with Rachel from Setuply to talk about project collaboration as part of your implementation planning process.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. This is the implementation planning episode. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including implementation planning here today. And you can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also see past episodes of the show at that same website, transformationgroundcontrol.com. So I'm excited for our next guest, first-time guest on the show, and very timely guest because it really fits in with this whole theme of implementation planning. And Rachel is the CEO of a company called Setuply, and their tool and their product focuses on helping teams onboard their teams. It helps with project collaboration, and it helps with a lot of these things that are required to be successful as you onboard a team and scale up a team to support your digital transformation. So with all that being said, Rachel, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Eric. It's great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the visitors are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to see where the audience is joining from today. Where are you joining from today, by the way, Rachel?
I'm actually joining today from Valletta, Malta, but Setuply is based out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Okay. Although it sounds like Malta. I mean, it's nothing against New Hampshire, but Malta sounds more appealing right now. But no offense to those that might be joining from New Hampshire, of course. But there's something about Malta. I've never been, but sounds like a great place. Um, so just to get started here today, then tell us a little bit about yourself as well as Setuply and what Setuply does.
So I'll start with Setuply. Setuply is a client onboarding and lifecycle management platform designed for solution providers to help optimize revenue recognition. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of the ways that we do this. I am the CEO of the company. As I mentioned, we're based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and covering North America and other areas of the world.
Great. And how long have you been in your role there at Setuply? How long have you been doing this?
Oh, I'm one of the founders. So since the very beginning, we were founded in 2022. So about 2 years ago, we just recently, last month, celebrated our birthday.
Oh, very cool. Congratulations. Most businesses do not make it to 2 years. So you are doing better than most already.
2 years.
2 years, and you've had a lot of good growth, and you're addressing a really interesting niche or a need in the market, which we'll get to here in a second. Also want to turn to the audience. Melissa is joining us from New Hampshire. So Melissa, thanks for joining. She's one of the people I may have offended with my comment about Malta being better or more appealing than New Hampshire. So hopefully she's not too offended by that. Again, I would love to hear from the rest of the audience where you're joining from today. So I guess just as we get started here, Rachel, what are some of when we think about digital transformation, like in this podcast and in a lot of the YouTube videos I put out, we talk a lot about more of the functional things that need to happen around like general project management and change management and technical stuff. But this is sort of a different angle we're talking about here today. We're talking about project collaboration and how teams collaborate in a digital transformation or an ERP implementation. So when we think about that, though, what are some of the things we need to think about as far as the major components of project collaboration? Like, what are some of the things we should be thinking about, or some of the things you've seen that are important to your clients and being successful in their projects?
So maybe taking a little bit of a step back. So companies decide for business reasons to be competitive that they need to enhance their operating stack. They need to enhance their ERP product, their HR product, and so on to make them more competitive, to make them more efficient. A lot of times it's a logical business decision that, yes, we all need to focus on bringing more AI into our lives and so on. So while it is a logical decision, sometimes there's a mind leap that needs to be taken that, hey, what will it mean to our team? What will it mean to the different stakeholders inside the team of a client that decides to go through the digital transformation? How will their work day change? Will they work themselves out of a job if the product or service that the company is using is so much more efficient? So a lot of these concerns, what if they will not be able to learn it? What if it's too difficult? So there's a massive mind shift that needs to happen on the side of a client, right? And a solution provider that is helping them enter that new realm, on board on the new technology, has to be aware of that. Has to be aware that it's not that they just bought the product, is that sometimes they're still making that mental shift towards a different technology. So incorporating that into the onboarding process is an absolutely necessary thing to do. Sometimes client is onboarded and up and running, and they realize what they've done months later, years later, that, oh, that's what it means. The impact could not necessarily be immediate. It could take a long time. So being with your client as they're going through that change is a key component outside of any technologies. And ultimately, technology helps kind of wrap yourself around it and make sure you're on top of clients' needs. You're aware of what they're doing. You're touching every team member that's affected, and your own team is in touch with what's being done as you're supporting that client from sales to onboarding to ultimately client success, client support. That you are aware of that transformation and you're supporting them in different ways.
Right. So it's really, what we're talking about here is not just an internal project team collaborating better, and it's not just a consulting partner that you might be working with collaborating better. It's a way to kind of bring the two parties together to collaborate those outside consultants with the internal resources. Is that sort of how
Correct.
you define it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it Obviously you saw a need in the market, which is why you guys started this company and you created this tool set to help address that need. But why is it before you started this company, and even now as you're getting more and more customers in your market, why is it that so many companies don't recognize the need right away, for what you're talking about? You mentioned that they sometimes realize later how important it would have been to have done this right. Why is it they don't recognize it earlier, oftentimes earlier in the cycle?
Um, Many reasons for that. Not the least of them being the view that onboarding is a kind of transitional process, just like sales, by the way. Hey, you sold and they're out of your sales cycle. There's someone else in there. Same for onboarding. They're onboarded. There's now someone else. But if you're doing it at scale, if you're doing many onboardings at the same time, ultimately the process is repeatable, just like sales is. And figuring out ways to help navigate through that process in the most efficient way, fulfilling way, because the relationship with the customer doesn't always start after they sign the dotted line. It signs when they really realize the value of what they
Mhm.
bought. So onboarding team is really the first one that helps customer realize that, start realizing that. So, but because that experience is viewed as transitional, that's the kind of a lost opportunity to think about it a little bit more strategically to say, hey, they're starting, it's like somebody, a baby learning to walk. Look at this, look at how amazing this new world is for you. We're so happy to be with you during that point of your transition, and let us take you further on that journey. So this kind of realization, the transitory nature of it, the other element that companies kind of this outside solution providers sort of cringe a little bit is it is expensive. Onboarding is not for some of the outsourced organizations. It could take 6 months. It could take a year and a half. And as you're helping client make that transition, like, hey, we've always done it this way. I'm not sure we can do it that way. Can we try it for a month? It could create incredible delays. And so traditionally, that organization was viewed as a cost driver rather than somebody that opens up the world to your clients. So being the cost driver, a lot of solution provider, service provider organizations are unwilling to kind of look at it as something that could be something other than just driving up costs.
Mm.
Uh, so looking at them as a strategic partner that can uncover new opportunities. Oh yes, I'm being onboarded, but oh, what about this module? I see that on my screen. What's going on? Oh, let us tell you about it. Let us educate you. Oh wow, this is amazing. So now you have onboarding team that's becoming almost like an advocate and a sales agent supporting the customer as they're learning more about this new solution.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's more than just onboarding, from getting a team up and running. It's also just educating and making sure they're in sync with where the project is headed, and also seeing opportunities to take the project in different directions as well.
Totally. And to what sort of drove us here, my partners and I are serial entrepreneurs. So this is actually our fourth venture. We find difficult challenges in the world of technology and set about to solve them. So the last venture was in the world of insurance and benefits. And one of the hardest things about that business was client onboarding.
Mm.
Uh, it's extremely important in the world of insurance, especially in the US, to get it right the first time, because you don't want to see people showing up at the hospital or their doctor without having coverage. So making sure you're doing it right, you're in touch with every single stakeholder, and everybody gets to the finish line. We looked at it kind of defensively. What can we do to deliver a really good service? And after we exited and were looking around for a good challenge to solve, uh, we started asking this question and realized that vast majority of service providers, solution providers out there are not using tools that are designed for that purpose. They're using, bits and pieces of different single point solutions. Hey, I'll use SharePoint to store client data. I'm going to use some specialized, maybe just project management software to manage the project. I'm going to use Google Forms to have clients complete forms. I'm going to use survey software to collect information in the course of onboarding. And so if you think about the client experience, it's a very fragmented. They are going through a lot at the moment, right? They're going through a major change, and now they have to put their document into SharePoint one place. Let me see what's on my plate somewhere else. So it becomes very frustrating for clients who are going through this. And also for the teams that are supporting them that have to constantly check in on, did they upload the document? Did they complete their task? And what ends up happening with many of these organizations, despite their best effort, is that a, a lot, I would say, what we're seeing is in some extreme cases, 90% of the time is spent chasing down and tying the loose ends between the different single point solutions, staying on top of clients. Hey, have you uploaded the file? Okay, not yet. I'll check in tomorrow. Imagine doing that for the service team instead of helping your customer experience new things. It's a completely different ball game.
Yeah, and it gets rid of all the emails back and forth and the other types of messages that may or may not get read. It gives you sort of a central place to collaborate, and I think that's that is something that's missing oftentimes is having that central source of truth for the project. Yeah. So when you think about onboarding, then onboarding a team, what are some of the keys to successful onboarding for a project team?
Definitely spend a lot of time upfront aligning on the expectations. So aside from anything technology related, really be on the same page with the client, what they hope to get out of it, what is the definition of success. A lot of times folks who sign the dotted lines are not the ones who are running the show. They're not the ones who are using the product and getting the work done. So that's the point when you usually get to meet them and get their perspective. Take the time to get their perspective. Also, early on, start thinking about what the rollout is going to look like. In some settings, it's 6 months later. In some settings, it's a year and a half later. So start thinking about how would the team respond, who are going to be your early adopters, who will start using the product and getting the rest of the team excited. So think about that. Define the rules of engagement. So let's say we're going to have a weekly call and you're going to have homework, and this is how you're going to know what's on your plate, because they're learning to walk, if you will, and you have to practice every now and then to get somewhere. So how you will communicate, who will be the ultimate person accountable or team accountable for the progress. So getting all of these things out and spending a lot of time up front defining, because sometimes weekly call is not possible, sometimes it's biweekly, making sure you're totally aligned on how they view success and how they want to work with you towards it is critical. And then being very consistent in following that process with them and supporting them and encouraging them at every step of the way is, hey, we've got this going, let's again see everybody, encouraging and supporting them throughout the process. And then when you get to the finish line, when you're looking at the rollout, uh, making sure you're collecting the feedback consistently. How was it? How could it be done better? One of the key things is it's having this consistent process. That's important. But as important is iterating on that process to make sure that you're continuing to be in touch with your customer and internally. And early on, perhaps in the process, having your sales team involved so there's continuity for the customer. Later on, bringing in client success into the picture so they get to know the client. It's not like, Joe over here will take care of you. Making sure that all the way you're supporting them through that transition, and that's what ends up, what's going to end up with a happy customer and the team that's feeling very happy about what they've gone through with that customer.
Yeah. So I think it's sort of implied, or you've mentioned it sort of in passing here, but I'll ask it more directly anyway. And that is, what happens when we don't do the things that you're talking about here? Like if we don't have that proper onboarding process, or we don't have that way of effectively collaborating as a project team, what does that do to a project? And what's sort of the pain that organizations feel when they don't do the stuff that you're talking about?
Oh, that's what turns it into a cost driver. That's what gives it the bad reputation. Uh, so some of the things, well, obviously the obvious thing is the scope creep. If there is no particular, if and sometimes in companies that don't have a scale service offering yet, a lot of times when we ask the question, so what's your process, we totally let our clients drive it. Well, they don't know how to drive yet. They You do this day in and day out. They are only going through that transformation, buying the new product, adopting your product just now. They will know anything about it. It's like coming to a French restaurant and saying, "Hey, the kitchen is over there. Knock yourself out." Uh, so,
Right.
so you can be sure you might not be happy with your dinner, if you do that. So, but going back to this, it's a scope creep. Client is not sure. They're just wiggling their way through. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to ask, and so, uh, hey, let's try this. Of course, I will do that for you, client. Let's try this, and then you discover 2 weeks later that's not what they wanted. Uh, so you absolutely need to have a process and you need to manage it. It's also from the perspective of a company that's implementing, could be incredibly frustrating, where you don't feel like you're making progress. They're still thinking about, we don't know about that. Uh, and meanwhile, sales team happily shoots over new cases or over the finish line for you to implement. And so it could become extremely frustrating and overwhelming for the onboarding team to deal with increasing workload, never seeing the finish line, and clients getting frustrated. So we've been doing it for 6 months. I don't know, where are we? Are we there yet? That's a typical question. Are we there yet? I have no idea what stage we're at. And those are some of the reasons to put in a systematic process in place for handling this. Uh, Set very clear expectations up front and support your clients. And one of the key places where I'll plug in technology a little bit here, it's staying on top of, are we there yet? So providing transparency to the client and to the team, whose court the ball is in, when is the finish line, how many tasks, things need to be completed before you get there, and making sure that technology, rather than this poor overworked onboarding team, stays on top of kind of getting those updates and nudging client along and supporting, being your sidekick and moving them through the onboarding journey.
I'm here with Rachel from Sedeply talking about project collaboration and project team onboarding. We've got a lot more to cover in this implementation planning episode, so be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
I'm excited to share our newly released 2024 Digital Enterprise Operations Report. This free download is available on the Third Stage website at thirdstage-consulting.com. This report is truly packed full of technology-independent and agnostic insights for your project to ensure that you're strategically optimized for success. Download your copy today with the QR code in front of me or visit our website for more details.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187, the implementation planning episode. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including program management of the implementations and transformations. So I'm here with Rachel from Sedeply, and we're talking about project collaboration and project team onboarding. With this tool that you guys offer the market, are you selling primarily to the technology service providers or the consultants? Or are you selling to the end customers? Or are you selling to both?
So we're selling to technology companies. So, for example, ERP technology, HCM, InsurTech, and others. We are also selling into the outsourced consulting organizations or service organizations that work alongside both these technology companies to implement and support customers. So,
Got it.
two flavors, ultimately solution providers, whether they are technology companies or service companies.
Right. Okay. Great. I want to turn to the audience real quickly too, and just recognize a couple people that have chimed in on where they're joining from today. Madhu Joshi from Laurel, Maryland, MD. I'm not sure if that means Maryland or if that's a country that I'm not aware of, but thank you for being here today. Either way, Madhu. And then Dr. Krunoslav Rees from Croatia, Europe. So thank you for being here today, Doctor, especially late in the day on a Friday. I appreciate you being here today. So I wanted to get into a couple follow-up questions. So given that most of the organizations that are buying your software and that are really tasked with thinking through how to onboard a project team and how to collaborate better with a project team, since those are oftentimes the technology providers that end customers turn to to be able to address those sorts of needs. What do you think, if we back up for a second and look at this from the perspective of ERP service organizations, what is it that stands in the way for success for ERP service organizations?
I think all of these challenges are not unique to just general world of solution providers. They're very specific and impactful to ERP organizations that deal with extended onboarding life cycles, client data. Typically, ERP service organizations are dealing with migrating clients' historical data from prior ERP system or in-house solution onto the new technologies. So managing a lot of the back and forth as you're collecting that and shifting it into the new software platform. The same challenge of these things take so long. A lot of times, it's staying on top of what's the next step. Are we there yet? Is client still with you? Because a lot of times, and I didn't mention it, but uh, that migration happens for clients' life continues as you're onboarding them for 6 months, a year and a half. So they have their objectives to meet, their business to run. And so onboarding a lot of times, not to say is an afterthought, but it's a parallel path that a portion of the team is going through while also doing their job. So having sensitivity with that and giving them a way to empowering them synchronously, asynchronously to do their part of the journey. I've completed these 15 forms. I've uploaded these documents. You wanted me to make a decision A or B in this path that we're gonna. I'll do that on Sunday. We don't need to schedule a meeting. So giving them the tools necessary to provide those inputs and stay engaged with you. Also on the client side, on the solution provider side that's doing the implementation, a lot of times it's a different domain experts and stakeholders that are handling it, sometimes even development team, making sure they're all in the loop. They know when it's their turn. They know in case they're going to be held back in an event there's more deals coming their way. So everybody is in the loop on each other's workload, expected go live times, any expected vacations. So technology helps to take those kind of a little frustrating logistical things out of the way, saying, hey, I'm going to be on vacation. Can we schedule a meeting? I'm going to be on vacation that week. Imagine that. Imagine if you're dealing with a decently sized team trying to schedule a regular connect with so many stakeholders. So those are some of the things if you start to tie in pieces of technology, and it's project management that goes into it. It's data staging and management, especially in the world of ERP, which is very, very data heavy. It's professional services automation. So keeping track of who's working on what, understanding your onboarding team's workload, making sure you recognize when people are maybe struggling or people are, doing really awesome, and you need to recognize that these teams tend to be very, very, very overworked. And also client engagement piece, making sure you are in touch with them, even if you can't physically do that. Technology supports you in that.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes total sense. So when we look at the things that stand in the way of success for ERP service organizations, what can be done to help address those challenges?
I think it starts with taking a good look inside and understanding where is the time being spent, how is the team functioning, how much time is being spent collecting data from clients, hunting them down, how much time is spent engaging meaningfully with them. If that second one is little, that team is not used efficiently. So it's time to start thinking about your processes. Who is driving the show? Who is deciding when is the next connect? When is the next this phase going to start? So taking a look at your process and starting to understand, A, whether you have a process, B, now that you have a process, what are the bottlenecks? What gets in the way of getting to the finish line in a predictable manner? uh, and then figuring out which technologies you need to get this out of the way. Because worst case scenario, and Excel is I bet you have millions of people in front of their computers. Statistics of who has Excel window up are extremely high. It's a valuable tool, but I think this tool is a little bit maybe too used too often as a crutch in this setting, and it's not sufficient because it doesn't give you the right client engagement, doesn't give you the PSA, and of course not the data piece. So figuring out what your stack is that gets you to the finish line, is that stack sufficient to
Right.
meet your objectives and as a solution provider?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense, and I can see why that would be so important. And it's also interesting to see how the tool you guys offer is a way to address those challenges. Why is it important to consolidate your operating toolkit, especially if you're a technology provider?
A lot of times, your time is spent managing the administrative overhead in keeping everything in sync. That's reason number one. Making sure you know when file is uploaded, you know that clients are connecting for a meeting. So it's management overhead. It's the client experience. So if client has to log in 5 different places to go through the project, it's probably not a good thing. It doesn't help. Uh, Security element. You have to maintain multiple separate secure logins, manage who has access to what. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you have to introduce a new employee on your side as a solution provider or a client, making sure the access is properly allocated, it becomes a project. The clients are not there for that purpose. So anything you can do to centralize and consolidate that experience, provide that central point of entry, the single point of truth, if you will, right? Uh, to make sure everybody is on the same page at the same time. They know exactly what's going on. When somebody uploads a document, everybody is aware, so that onboarding rep can pick it up and start running with it, almost like a little bit like an Olympic relay. You upload, you immediately get notification. Onboarding rep starts working with the file, completes the file, uploads it, gives it to the next person over who does whatever they do. Get back to the client. We're all set. Let's move on to the next point. That's what kind of having centralized system, centralized process allows you to do, as opposed to checking in. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Oh, good. 2 weeks later. So ultimately, you're looking at like all of us, getting stuff done faster, better, with less effort.
Right. Right. Yeah, I can see. I mean, that's obviously what we're all striving for when we're managing these sorts of projects is how can we be more efficient? How can we make more progress? And how can we ensure we don't miss any of the key stakeholders and that sort of thing? So I can see how that would be super helpful from a project collaboration perspective. How does Setuply foster some of this cross-functional connectivity and collaboration?
So our technology is natively built to contain all of these pieces into one. So Setuply has project management, professional services automation, so PSA component, data staging, client engagement. We also have case management built into one platform. They're feeding off the same data. And so as the project moves forward, you can see data being uploaded, you can see team members allocated to work with it, you can see clients inputs. It's all connected into one. So that's what allows uh, that centralized experience, holistic view into the project for every single stakeholder. But taking it a little bit further, what we've done with our integrations is help close the loop between the different operating teams that interact with onboarding department. So through our integrations, for example, with sales CRMs, the minute the deal is sold, we can have the deal automatically flow into the onboarding team, so nothing is lost in the process. If you ask the client, remember those good old days when you go to the doctor's office and you have to fill out that piece of paper and say, yes, my date of birth, yes, all this. It's so frustrating to have to do this over and over and over again. And if that client spent their time providing all that information to the sales organization, to have somebody else in the same vendor team, right, ask the same questions, that starts off the relationship on the wrong foot immediately. So if you can eliminate that piece and making sure that, yep, we know exactly who you are, you're still using that product, yes, perfect, we're on the same page, we're moving forward. So you already start that relationship on the next level, not on the ground level. So starting with the the project management life cycle, uh, project management, PSA, client engagement, data staging as one platform, and also tying in their other pieces ultimately ties in not just your onboarding team, it ties them to your sales organization, it ties them to your client success. So it gives a holistic experience to them. They're all connected, but also to the client. They feel like they're going through the same group of people, same values, same experiences at every stage of their life cycle as a customer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's I can see how that would be super helpful and super important, and it is a missing link in a lot of these projects for sure. So what about when we think about um, coming back to why you built this product? You said you and your co-founders are entrepreneurial or serial entrepreneurs. You've started multiple companies. How did you come across this need in the market, or this particular need or problem you're trying to solve in the market?
So we found it to be one of the hardest things in the prior venture, which was in the insurance technology space, that there's a lot of moving pieces and you have to get it just right. And when we were out there looking for the next best thing to build and next big challenge to solve, we started to ask this question of various solution providers out there. So how do you solve it? How do you deal? How do you onboard your customers? And what we discovered that 90% of the time, we probably had, me personally, probably at least 300, 400 different conversations with solution providers. 90% of the time, the answer is, yeah, I use 2 or 3 products, but I mostly use Excel. I don't mostly use some kind of spreadsheet to keep track of. On one tab, I have this client. On the second tab, I have my team. On the third tab, I have something else. And it's an awful way. And imagine thinking of sharing that Excel spreadsheet with your customers, how they would feel. They just bought this incredible technology product, and as you know, that uh, ERP platforms, HCM, insurance technology platforms had been maturing, had been adding AI, had been getting more modern, but the companies that are supporting them haven't always kind of stayed on top of the best ways they could do their job. They're working with incredibly powerful platforms, but it's kind of a shoemaker's dilemma. Uh, your own stack is very, very bare. And so that's what led us to sort of start engaging in these conversations and asking questions. So what's in it? What can be done? Well, it's this disconnection. How can we bring it together? It's client engagement. It's a major piece. They got their job to do, right? So how do you stay on top of them without having your team personally call every single day to ask, are we there yet? So what can technology do? And so as you start to fill in those gaps and put together a cohesive solution that touches onboarding from these multiple perspectives and multiple stakeholders, that's what ultimately led to Setaply.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah, it's such a common problem in the market that you're solving. It's kind of surprising that there haven't been more attempts to solve that problem sooner in the industry.
I think we're at the perfect point where customers' digital adoption rates are continuing to speed up. More and more of them are realizing that, hey, I'm going to be behind the 8 ball if I don't do this sooner. So there's a higher inflow of customers coming in. They also are used to having faster gratification, so they want to get to the finish line sooner. So that's one dimension. You have increased load. On the other hand, you also have a difficult time with knowledge workers that support these service organizations. They're hard to come by. It's a difficult job to do this, and so there's a shortage of skilled knowledge workers to support client onboarding. That's what ultimately is sort of this combination of different factors that is starting to drive looking into specialized solutions. Where if you imagine Salesforce 20 years ago, right? Uh, Nobody would think about that you need specialized software to sell. You just pick up the phone and get stuff done, right? We're in that place where you need this in order to make these digital adoption, digital transformation experiences go faster and be more successful.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And you're right. I mean, the digital adoption rates are increasing and speeding up. And, the technologies that organizations are deploying from an enterprise technology space, those are getting more and more robust, more complex. And so the implementation and the back end software you use to manage an implementation hasn't really kept up with that pace of change. So it's good to see you guys are doing that. We want to say hello to a couple of guests that are joining us here today. Kristen's joining from Philadelphia. Thank you for being here today, Kristen. And we have Katie joining from Cape Cod. So, and she said she loves hearing about this important topic. So thank you for being here today, Kate. So I guess just to, we think about project teams, collaboration, onboarding, upskilling, some of the themes we're talking about here today. What are some of the sort of the closing takeaway advice you'd leave project teams with? What are some of the things they should be thinking about as it relates to how to set up a project team, how to onboard them, how to upskill them, how to help ensure the project teams collaborate better? What are some sort of takeaways or first steps organizations can take to sort of set up that foundation?
I think having the awareness and understanding how important onboarding is in the life cycle of your customer, ultimately, how much that onboarding team affects the success of that relationship. Once you realize that and make sure that the onboarding team realizes their importance, you can start thinking about and asking questions. What can we do to change that experience, to improve that experience for the customers and for that group? How can you be more efficient, effective in catering to your customers? One fascinating thing about onboarding teams is if you kind of do disc profiling and understand their personalities, they love to solve puzzles. A lot of the folks who work for the onboarding teams, they like to build things. They like to solve puzzles. They love to do what they do. They love to introduce customers into that realm of what's new. So figuring out what to take off their plate so they could have more meaningful conversations with customers. That's what ultimately companies should be thinking about. Instead of, hey, I need this file, please upload it, there's a piece of data missing. Instead of that is, so what do you hope to accomplish with this? Let's see how we can help you. So they could be more consultative as opposed to kind of transactional, what they have always been.
Right. Yeah. And it like you said earlier, it gives you that single source of truth on a project too. So, having visibility into the project and being able to see, the status of the project in any given time. I also feel like, one thing we haven't talked about that I'd be curious to get your feedback on is I feel like as you describe this whole process of collaboration, upskilling, onboarding, all the stuff we've talked about here today, I feel like the tool that you guys provide and the themes we're talking about here today, it also has like an intangible effect, I would think, on how clients can maintain some level of control over the project. Because I think a lot of times what happens is that the technology service provider comes in and they have all this stuff going on behind the curtain. There's stuff that only they know how to do because they know the technology, they know how to configure it, they know how to build it, all that stuff. But then the client doesn't have visibility or transparency into what the client or what the service provider is doing. And there's sort of this learned helplessness that comes along with that. And I feel like this tool sort of brings things out to the surface to where now the client understands better what's going on. The client has better visibility and better line of sight into what's happening with their service provider. Is that something you see as well, or sort of maybe an unintended benefit that you'd see from this whole collaboration process we're talking about?
Oh, definitely. Very good question. spend a lot of time thinking through the client portal, the client engagement. Client is a vital piece of this. This is all being done to make it better for them. So making sure that they see the timeline, they know exactly where they are on the journey. They also see what the project load, activity load, task load looks like, who's working on what. So, oh, so you're working on this and you're working on that. Can I help you? Can I actually have a question about what you've been building for me? Can I engage? So letting them see, letting them in, giving them insight into what the team has been doing for them is really valuable. So we made sure that they get to see the activity stream on the client portal, because it also, in addition to kind of giving you a piece of comfort, yes, I'm not an expert, but I could see that you guys are doing, moving me forward. So thank you. But I have a question. So it opens up the dialogue and gets them into the game. It also gives a degree of appreciation that I think this team, onboarding teams need. What have you done for me? I don't see anything because I don't have any insight into what's being done for me. So it gives a lot of appreciation for what's being done, further, helping to improve the relationship. And it allows them to, hey, client, I need you to answer this question. I need you to do this and that. And the other thing allows the client to engage in the process themselves on their time, weekends or nights or wherever they're able, to move the process along. So it makes them empowered in their own process of onboarding.
Yeah. Now, if I know you said that most of who you sell to is our technology service providers. What if I'm a client, like an end customer, and I've hired a technology service provider and I want to use your tool? Do you ever have end customers that come to you and say, we want to use this tool as part of our process, and we're going to ask our technology provider to collaborate with us using our tool? Does that ever happen, or is that an option for customers that might be listening?
It's a good question, and we're seeing this question being raised again and again. In that they want customers who are being onboarded, who are going through this process for a year and a half, they want to have these things, they want to have the visibility. And so, yeah, interestingly enough, customers themselves who are going through the digital transformation are becoming a source of sales kind of avenue for us to introduce their service providers into new and better ways of doing things. So definitely this question has come up again and again, and I think we'll hear it more as, again, our customers are driving, they're the ones who are going through the digital transformation, and they want to make sure they have a stake in that experience.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So your company is Setuply. Where can we learn more about Setuply?
So you can check out our website, Setuply. It's like set up easily, enjoyably, frequently, .com. You can also visit our LinkedIn page, where we have a lot of content relevant to, becoming more aware. It's not all about technology. It's about changing the mindset. Technology comes in as a sidekick.
Right. And you also have an upcoming conference coming up. Can you tell us about that too?
Oh, we're so excited about that. So it's called Onboarding World. It will be held in Boston, October 2nd through 4th. And it's everything you ever wanted to learn about onboarding. We're going to have industry experts, people. We're going to have face-offs, contests, everything that you ever wanted to know about client onboarding. So if you're thinking about upskilling the teams, that's a place to be. If you want to share your expertise, we still might have some space on the panels to discuss various controversial topics, such as personalization versus scale in client onboarding, a very important topic. Where do you draw the line? How can technology stretch that line for you? And so on. And we have a bunch of really exciting events planned outside of the actual conference rooms in the evenings and so on. So definitely, if you find yourself thinking what to do, what's the onboarding, what's the vision for the coming year, what can we do to upskill the team, it's a place to go to. Onboarding World.
Onboarding World, and the website is Setuply, SETUPLY.com. All right. Thank you, Rachel. Great conversation and a lot of good stuff to think about. It's one of those topics that oftentimes we don't think enough about, how we're going to onboard a team, how we're going to build a collaborative environment to be able to work together amongst ourselves, as well as with our outside system integrators and software vendors and consultants. So a lot of good stuff that we covered there, and got a lot more to cover in this episode too. In addition to what we just talked about with Rachel, we're going to now shift gears and talk about the difference between program and project management, which is really important because there is a difference, and you need to address both aspects, not just the project management, but also the program management of your overall transformation. And after we share that segment or cover that topic, we're going to get into some of the top to-dos that you need to do before you start your transformation if you want to be successful. And then finally, later in the show, we'll get into how to create a realistic project plan. So be sure to stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear.
I'm excited to share our newly released 2024 Digital Enterprise Operations Report. This free download is available on the Third Stage website at thirdstage-consulting.com. This report is truly packed full of technology-independent and agnostic insights for your project to ensure that you're strategically optimized for success. Download your copy today with the QR code in front of me or visit our website for more details.
Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting and your host of Transformation Ground Control. I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is the company that I'm the CEO of. Third Stage Consulting is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world to reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And the show is also sponsored or produced by Major Tom Productions. So throughout this episode, we've been talking a lot about implementation planning, obviously, sort of that project planning, the phase zero, the digital strategy, the road mapping, project collaboration, how to build up the team, all that good stuff. So there's a lot we're covering here today, but we haven't yet really delved into the difference between project management and program management. And this is a really important thing because a lot of organizations erroneously just focus on the technical project management. They don't focus on the overall program, which includes technical project management, but also some of the other work streams that go into a transformation. And a lot of times system integrators and value-added resellers and software vendors will tell you that, hey, we do the project management. We've got it covered. Don't worry about it. But the reality is they are the project managers, but they're the project manager for their one little work stream within a broader transformation. You've got things like business process management. You've got organizational change management. You've got the overall architecture, data migration, integration between systems, and just the overall management of the system integrator, the software vendor, and all the internal resources. So there's a lot that goes into program management and a lot of other work streams that fall under the purview of project management or program management. I'm sorry. So there is a difference, and what I want to do in this next segment is play you this clip where I actually whiteboard out the difference between project management and program management, and I sort of explain what the full scope of program management is and how it relates to project management. So with that being said, let's roll the clip here of program versus project management.
As organizations are going through digital transformations, one of the first things they focus on typically is project management. How do we get the right project manager? How do we ensure that we have the right project plan? How do we ensure that we have the right resources allocated to that project? But what ends up happening is organizations miss out on the bigger picture of an overall program, especially if you're going through a transformation in the context of not just technology implementation, but more importantly, more of a business transformation. Program management becomes even more important in those cases. So what I want to do today is talk about the difference between project management and program management
and unpack those differences so that you can ultimately define a digital strategy that encompasses both and ensures that you've captured the things that are required to be successful in your digital transformation. Now, the topics I'm going to talk about today are also topics that you can find in our digital transformation report, an annual report we publish each year that highlights some of the benchmarks and lessons and trends from digital transformations in the last year. And it also includes a number of software reviews and independent rankings of different technology options in the marketplace. So I encourage you to download that digital transformation report, which covers these topics that I'm going to talk about today, but it also covers a lot of other topics that will help you through your digital transformation. So to start, I want to talk about project management. And that's the thing that I think most of us can get grounded in and really understand when it comes to digital transformation. So I'm not just going to call this project management, though. To clarify and be more specific, I'm going to call this software project management. And I'll discuss here in a moment why that is such an important differentiator. So software project management is essentially what most of us think about and most of us focus on when we hire a system integrator, for example, or a software vendor that's going to manage the software implementation. So this is where we get into things like the technical configuration. This is where we get into the overall design. Even before you get to the config, you have the design of the software. You'll have the technical testing of the software. And then ultimately, you're going to have the go live of the software. This is obviously not an all-inclusive project plan, but I want to call out these tasks that are commonly included within a software vendor or system integrator's proposal as the project management. Now, I don't want to be dismissive of the concept of software project management, but the reason I call this out and separate it is because it's one piece of an overall program. I'll talk in a few minutes about what those other components are, but it's really important to understand that when you hire a system integrator and a software vendor, they're really the project lead for a technical work stream. So project management is important here, but the project management is typically focused on deploying technology. And as we'll talk about, there's a lot of other pieces of a transformation that are just as, if not more important than this. And if all we do is focus on this, then what we're doing is we're underestimating the amount of effort, the amount of resources, the amount of tasks and deliverables that need to happen within a transformation. And we're neglecting all the things over here that I haven't gotten to yet that are even more important to ensure that we're successful. So to start, we want to understand what the technical project management is, but next we're going to talk about what some of the other components and work streams are within program management. So as we slowly start to unpack what program management is, I'm going to start by just saying we're going to have an overarching PMO. Typically, you want to have an overall enterprise program that's going to manage the entire program. So now what I want to do is talk about how this all ties together. Now, certainly within your overall PMO, and even if you don't have an internal PMO, by the way, this is something that you want to make sure you establish, is make sure you establish a program management office that can manage the overall program, including your software vendor and system integrator resources here. So the software vendor, software project management reports up to the PMO typically. And then that begs the question of, well, what else is there? Why do we have a whole PMO just to manage this? Well, the reason is because there's a lot more than just this. First of all, I'll say that software project management may be multiple work streams. So you may end up finding that you're not just deploying one technology, you're deploying a best of breed model, or you're deploying a core back office ERP system, but then you've got some third-party bolt-ons on top of that. So if you are deploying multiple technologies, you want to make sure that you recognize and identify that there's different threads, different software threads that have their own plans that ultimately need to be integrated up to the overall program. So that's the first thing, is you may have multiple technical and software work streams depending on what it is you're deploying. Now, secondly, even if you're just deploying one system, but especially if you're deploying multiple systems, you're going to have a segment for, call it the technical aspects that are not software specific. And specifically what I mean by this is overall system architecture, data, and integration. So it's really that overarching thread that ties together multiple technologies, and even within one technology, it ties together the different modules within this technology and any third-party bolt-ons that you might have on top of that. That's really the architecture piece. So architecture, we're talking about solution architecture. How do these systems tie together? Not only the new systems that you're deploying, but in the interim, while you're deploying new technologies, chances are fairly high that you're going to want or need some sort of interim integration points to your third-party systems or your legacy systems that you have now. A lot of those systems, if not all of those systems, may go away eventually, but as you're going through the transformation, most organizations need to have that interim integration built. And so you need to have an overall solution architecture that defines how this is all going to tie together, the different technologies, the different modules within the same technologies, how does it all tie together? You also have your data and analytics, we'll call it. So this is where we get into data migration, data mapping, data cleansing, which is really just taking your old legacy data, making sure you clean it up, map it to the new system or systems, and then ultimately define what kind of analytics you want to get out of those new system or systems. So again, it does touch this part over here with project management, but typically this is out of scope with a software project manager and a software focused work stream. And then the other piece within this is the overall integration. And this is becoming an increasingly important function and an underrated function within digital transformation on the technical side, because even with the same software vendors, a lot of these software vendors have third-party systems that they've acquired that still have to be integrated with the core ERP or the core enterprise technology. So integration is very important, especially if you're deploying a best-of-breed model or you're using business intelligence and data analytics tools on top of a core enterprise technology. So this is another work stream, and this is a summary of some of the activities within the work stream that's not software specific, but it's very technical in nature. It needs to integrate with the overall PMO and overall program plan to augment what's being done here on the software project management side of things. So the next project within an overall program that needs to be managed within a successful digital transformation is organizational change management. And this is anything to do with the people side of change. And this also goes well beyond training and communications. Now, typically when you hire a software vendor and system integrator, they'll tell you that we are going to help you manage the change. We're going to do change management. We're going to do that in the form of technical training. In fact, that's a concept I didn't mention before. But here's where you would say, or where a vendor would say, we're going to do technical training to teach people how to use our system to perform transactions. That's an important part of change management, but it's one microcosm, one subset of an overarching change management plan. An overarching change management plan should look at things like change readiness. What kind of organization is it that you are today? What kind of culture do you have today? What are you trying to become? And what does that mean in terms of the potential organizational pitfalls that might come along with that and the potential sources of resistance that might come along with that? Another important work stream within change management is change impact. So this is where you look at where we are today in our current state, where we're going in our future state, and how different work groups and departments and individuals within an organization are affected by that. Because ultimately, we can't do this tech training on its own without having done this change impact. We need this change impact to be successful in our training so that we can get the changes out on the table and help educate people on what the changes will be well before we get to the tech training. So that by the time we get to technology training, now we're starting to reinforce what we've already communicated and worked through with our employee base. Now it's more a matter of just showing us how to do it within the new system. Too often, software vendors and system integrators jump straight to this, and it creates a ton of resistance and a ton of backlash within the organization because the organization isn't ready for all the massive changes that come with new technologies today. That statement, by the way, is more true the older your technology is and the more of a leap you're making in terms of upgrading your technologies. And then a final work stream I'll focus on today, although this is not every single work stream within change management that I'm talking about, but some of the highlights. Another one is the organizational design. So as we're defining the change impacts, we're typically doing that in conjunction with business process improvements. And as we're defining what the improvements are, we're identifying how people's jobs are impacted, and we're also defining how the new organization is going to look. What are the roles and responsibilities? I'm actually going to call that out as a separate or a call out here. Roles and responsibilities in this new organizational future state. And again, we need to understand this as an organization. Our people need to understand this so that A, they aren't alarmed by some of the changes that are coming as part of the transformation, but B, so we can get more business value out of the transformation and this massive investment we're about to make in new technology. So organizational design, roles and responsibilities is another important thread within change management. Now, for more information on what a complete change management program looks like, I've included a link to a video right here that you can click on that dives into more specifically what change management is. I have a number of other videos beyond that one video that talks about what some of the methodologies are, some of the tool sets, the deliverables you should focus on. I'm not going to dive into all that here today, but check out those videos on my YouTube channel for more information about what makes an effective change management program. And for even more information, I encourage you to download our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a report that I wrote, or a white paper that I wrote, that unpacks change management as a whole and talks about all the different work streams and threads within change management, and it gives you a roadmap for how to deploy a change management program. So I encourage you to download that Guide to Organizational Change Management in the links in the description field below. So we've talked about software project management, talked about architecture, data and integration, change management. Now, last but not least, is business process reengineering. So this is the whole business process thread of how we're going to change our business processes and what those processes are going to look like in the future. And a lot of times people think, well, we don't need to do this because we're already doing it over here when we deploy new software. There's some truth that this is going to drive to some degree what your business processes will look like. But if you don't have sort of a top-down vision of what you want your processes to be, regardless of what technology you're deploying, then this is going to become a very aimless work stream that's going to get out of control, go over budget, take a lot more time than it should because you don't have clarity on what you want your business processes to be. Today's modern ERP systems are more flexible than ever, and even the simplest workflows that you would think would be standard, vanilla, off-the-shelf, out-of-the-box type of technologies are not so. There's a lot of different decisions that need to be made, and if you don't have clarity on what you want your processes to be, which is why this is so important, this work stream quickly gets out of control. This work stream is impacted. You have a lot of problems here from a human adoption perspective. This becomes difficult as well because now you don't have clarity on how you're going to integrate and leverage different technologies to improve your business processes. So this is a core fundamental aspect of an effective digital transformation. And here's where you define your current state processes. You don't want to spend a ton of time here, but you do need to understand where you are today, partly because part of what you do today in most organizations, there's value in there. A lot of times executives and organizations as a whole think, let's not worry about this because this is our future state over here. Let's focus on the future state. Fair enough. You want to focus on the future state, but you do need to understand where you're starting from because there's a lot of value and a lot of core competencies you've built over decades, if not longer, that you want to preserve. And then, of course, there's improvements you want to make. There's pain points. There's deficiencies in your current business processes that you want to focus on improving. You want to prioritize what those things are, where the real business value is, what the business case justification will be. All that is an important part of defining the current state, which then leads us to the future state. And this is exactly what it sounds like. This is us defining what our future state processes are so that now we can bridge the gap between current state and future state to do our change impact. Now we've got clarity on how we're going to deploy technology here and here, and it starts to pull together the entire transformation in that way. And then, of course, I mentioned a moment ago, you've got your business case. And this is where you quantify what the ROI is, what kind of business value you expect to get out of the transformation, where you're going to get the business value, and ultimately you use this as a tool to manage to business benefits realization as you go through the transformation and even after the transformation. Now, the reason this is so important is not only because you need to have clarity for business processes to help drive and enable some of these other work streams, but because it also gives you a lot of clarity and it gives you project governance and controls as it relates to PMO, or the Program Management Office. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So now we've talked about the different pieces of an overall program. We've talked about how software project management is different than some of these other work streams and why these other work streams are so important. But now you've got a lot of different work streams that need to be tied together. That's where program management comes into play. And again, this box is intentionally different than this box. You might have an SI or a system integrator, software vendor resource that is your technical project manager. They would fill this role here, but you still need someone up here that's providing the overall program management that now ties together all these different pieces. And so there's a few different components of program management here. One is making sure that we've got the project plans aligned across these different work streams. You've got a software vendor here that's going to come together with their proposal or their timeline of what they think the technical implementation looks like. You might have multiple software vendors doing the same thing if you have multiple systems you're deploying. You've got this piece, which is the architecture, data migration, integration, which is going to augment what's done here, and that's going to determine what the overall full plan looks like, as well as the full duration and timeline. Change management, of course, is its own animal. It's its own strategy that needs to be integrated with the overall transformation. And then, of course, business process improvement. And by the way, the things that are most likely to slow down a project and create disruption and cause a project to take longer than expected are these three right here. I don't want to say that this is rare, that you have delays or budget overruns here, but when it does happen, it's typically because there's issues over here that are affecting this piece here. So that's even more reason why you need a solid program management office to manage the entire program. Program management office is also important in terms of ensuring that we have project governance and controls in place. So I mentioned before how the business case is an important project governance tool because it gives us clarity and direction when we have a need to pivot or make decisions on what the project scope is going to be or where we might cut scope or add to scope. Someone has a customization request, someone wants to buy another module for technology. If we don't have this business case and ROI in place as sort of our guiding North Star for the transformation, we're going to be making these decisions based on gut feel and emotion. But here, with this in place, now we can make tangible business decisions on the rest of the project. Any changes that come along with the rest of the project, we can use this business case as a project governance tool to manage that entire thing. So essentially what the program management office is a way to tie together the entire operations or the entire set of work streams and the different projects within the overall program. And it's also a way to incorporate project governance with a project charter, the overall program plan, the business case, the overall vision and strategy for the project, the resourcing plan. All that stuff is really important from a program management perspective. And perhaps more importantly, and most importantly, is that by having this program management in place, this enables you, the implementing organization, not the system integrator, not the software vendor, but you, the implementing organization, you now have control and ownership of the overall program. And you should. This is your organization, you're deploying technology to improve your business, and you need that ownership and buy-in and support and control of the overall program. So what does this all mean to your digital transformation? Well, first of all, it means you want to open up your mind and look beyond software project management. And like I said at the beginning of this video, more often than not, software vendors and system integrators and value-added resellers propose a plan that focuses right here. But your transformation typically will entail all this other stuff, including the program management. So you want to make sure you have a full program plan that integrates all these pieces. You also want to make sure you've got project governance in place and program governance in place, and that you ultimately staff this in a way that allows you to have ownership of the overall program. And perhaps most importantly, the reason program management is so important and why this is so important to you as an organization is it allows you to focus on the things over here that are more important to success than the technical implementation. This is important, don't get me wrong, but this stuff is ultimately more important, especially these two right here. If we do this stuff really well and this really well, then chances are pretty high that this, the software project management and the architecture, data, and integration work streams are going to come together better than if you hadn't focused on those things. So that's a little bit about program versus project management. Hopefully that helps you provide or helps you understand some of the concepts around what you should be addressing as part of your transformation from a program management perspective. And understanding that difference is one of the things you need to do before a digital transformation really begins in earnest, in addition to some of the other planning things we're talking about here today. But I also want to shift gears after a break here. We're going to talk about some of the other to-dos that you need to do before a digital transformation. So those things you want to make sure you've got completed or at least in progress as part of a prerequisite to setting yourself up for a successful implementation. And that's where a lot of companies fall short, is they just sort of rush right into the implementation without getting these prerequisites, these foundational prerequisites in place. So we're going to play you this clip here in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting, and I want to invite you to join our annual tech agnostic conference called Digital Stratosphere. Digital Stratosphere is a conference that features some of the industry's brightest minds, greatest thinkers, and it's a great opportunity to network with peers, other industry people, other CIOs, other project team members that are going through digital transformations or ERP implementations. We've got a great lineup of speakers this year. It's a 3-day event, a lot of great entertainment, networking opportunities. I'll be there as one of the keynote speakers, along with some of my favorite speakers in the industry as well, both within Third Stage Consulting, but also outside the company as well. So I encourage you to check it out and learn more. You can go to stratosphere2024.com to learn more about the event. You can see the agenda, the way it's shaping up, and you can see some of the past testimonials of people that have attended. And the event is October 2nd through the 4th, 2024. It's going to be based in Denver, Colorado, downtown Denver, beautiful downtown Denver in the fall, which is a great time to visit Denver if you haven't been. Again, stratosphere2024.com. Check out the agenda. Check out our early bird pricing for passes. And the other beautiful things, if you can't be here in person in Denver, which we hope you can, but if you can't, you can also join remotely as well. We have virtual passes available as well, so you're able to join from wherever in the world you might want to join from. So stratosphere2024.com, check it out, and I hope to see you there.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. This is the implementation planning episode. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We have offices in North America, the EMEA region, as well as Asia Pacific region. So be sure to reach out to us if you have a digital transformation in any one or more of those regions and would like help with your transformation. We can help. So be sure to reach out to us. And we're going to get into now some of the to-dos, the things you need to have done or at least well underway before you start an implementation. And this is really important because if you get too far ahead of yourself and you just go out and you start designing and building stuff from a technology perspective without having some of these to-dos in place, you're going to end up spinning your wheels and wasting a lot of time and money and creating a lot of chaos for your organization later. So these are the top things that you want to make sure you do and complete before you begin a digital transformation in earnest.
When you get proposals from your vendors that include a proposed project plan, it's two problems. One is it's usually overly optimistic as far as how long it's going to take, how many resources it's going to require. Secondly, it's usually incomplete. It doesn't include all the non-vendor, non-software specific things that need to happen during a transformation. So things like organizational change management, process improvements, data migration, data mapping, integration to other systems. Things like that all need to be accounted for and factored into your implementation plan. And in many cases, those activities are actually what drive your overall time and cost. So when you get your input from your software vendor, consider it just one input, one piece of your complete implementation plan. Don't base your entire implementation on that one plan because it's just one work stream within the overall plan. So that's one of the first things you want to do is make sure you have a very clear implementation plan that focuses on establishing a very solid foundation before you begin the technical implementation. And I'll get to some of those points here in a second. The next thing that needs to happen before you begin your implementation is to define your future state business processes. And a lot of organizations intuitively think that why don't we just wait until we implement the software, we'll let the vendor come in, the software will tell us or dictate to us how we're going to set up our business processes. There's a couple problems here. One is that today's ERP systems are so flexible in general that they can handle simple workflows or even the most basic workflows a multitude of different ways. So if you don't have the answer or the direction of how you want the software to work, you're going to be spinning your wheels trying to make decisions while the meter's running on all the expensive technical consultants. The second reason why you want to focus on defining your macro business processes up front, and even more important than the first reason, is that you want to define those things that are unique differentiators for you, things that are unique to your business model, things that make you different from your competitors. You want to define those processes and what you want that future state to look like so that you can define for the software vendor what you want your business to look like, rather than assuming that the software vendor will tell you how to run your business. Certainly, there's going to be certain parts of your business like accounts payable or general ledger that are more basic or vanilla in nature, and chances are you might be able to settle for whatever the software does in those areas. But when it comes to the customer experience, when it comes to unique differentiators for how you provide superior service or a superior product to your customers, those business processes you want to focus a lot of time on making sure you define those up front so that you have a clear blueprint for how you're going to deploy the technology later on. Just as you need to define what your future state business processes look like, you also need to define what your future state organization is going to look like. If you're going to consolidate your procurement department, for example, or you're going to move to a shared service HR model or shared services within accounting and finance, you want to define what that all looks like. How are you going to be organized? What are roles and responsibilities going to look like so that you can involve those people affected by those changes, you can involve them in the transformation, and also so you have a clear vision for how you're going to deploy the technology and you're not spinning your wheels making those decisions while you're trying to implement technology. So if you have that clear vision of what the organization is going to look like on the other side, that's going to give you a lot more clarity and a lot more efficiency and effectiveness to how you deploy new technology. It's often assumed that a digital transformation is going to consist of one single ERP system that's going to do everything for us. It's very rare that that ever truly materializes. Most organizations, even if they find that an ERP system does 80 or 90% of what they need it to do, they're still going to have other bolt-on systems, other technologies they need to integrate to for regulatory reasons or because there's weaknesses in the ERP system. And by the way, every ERP system out there has weaknesses that you'll need to address. And oftentimes the way to address that is through bolt-on systems. So you need to define what that future state technology and roadmap is. And it's not just the enterprise technologies you have to think about. You also have to think about how we're going to interface to other non-enterprise technologies. So for example, if there's email approvals or things that you're going to do in SharePoint outside the system and it's going to somehow integrate back to your ERP system, those are just two small examples of how you'd want to make sure you have a clear roadmap from a technology perspective of how all these pieces are going to fit together. Most organizations simply don't find that one single solution is going to solve all their problems. Typically, it's a multitude of different technologies and tools, and you need a clear roadmap for how to tie that all together. One of the biggest indicators of how long your project is going to take and how much it's going to cost and how painful it's going to be is how you address organizational change management. In other words, organizational change management is typically going to be on your critical path for your implementation. So when you're building out your implementation plan and when you're in this implementation readiness phase of you've selected software but you're not quite ready to implement yet, you want to define what that organizational change strategy is. And it all begins with two things: an organizational assessment, which is an understanding and an analysis of your business and your organization benchmarked to other cultures and other organizations so that you can identify where those pockets of resistance are likely to come from. And secondly, change impact. So how is it the jobs are going to be impacted? How is it that the future state organization is going to look and how are we going to get there? What's the plan? How are we going to migrate to that? All that stuff should be incorporated into your overall implementation plan and strategy. And again, that's something that will determine whether or not you finish on time, on budget or not. And by the way, the more effectively you handle organizational change management and the more time and money you spend on change management, it's more than likely going to reduce your costs and reduce your overall implementation duration and risk as well. It's important to go into these projects with a mindset that you are in charge of this project. You, the implementing organization, are responsible for managing the system integrator and the vendors. So therefore, you need to have your own PMO, your own project governance and controls established. You can't just rely on a software vendor to provide governance and controls, partly because that's not their specialty, but also because, again, they're just one part of the overall transformation. You need more of a program governance and controls to manage not just the technology, but some of the other pieces that we've talked about here today: change management, process improvement, architecture, integration, data migration, all that stuff. That all needs to be managed underneath an umbrella of project governance and controls. So the better job you can do establishing those governance controls up front, it's going to give you more ownership, more control, and more buy-in into the overall project. And it's also going to make it a lot less likely that the software vendor is going to come in and hijack the project and run it for you. It's going to allow you to be in the driver's seat and let the software vendor take more of a support role. So these are just a few of the important things that you need to make sure you have in place prior to beginning your transformation. And we commonly refer to this at third stage as the implementation readiness phase. And again, that's the phase from the time you've decided what your technical roadmap's going to be until you actually start the implementation. Most organizations just jump straight into the implementation. They don't have a gap there or they don't have time to prep. And what I'm suggesting here is that it's very important that you take one step back to be able to take two steps forward That one step back is to take the time to get that implementation readiness in place, get that solid foundation and blueprint in place so that you can be successful in your transformation.
So that's a bit of an overview of some of the things you need to think about, and we hope you'll think about before you begin your digital transformation. It's those prerequisites that really provide that foundation for a really successful digital transformation. So hopefully that helps provide some context there. And in our last segment here, we're going to shift gears. We're also going to share with you how to create a realistic project plan. A lot of times organizations will create a project plan that isn't complete, or it doesn't have realistic assumptions, or the timeline and the budget is just completely unrealistic. And this is what gets a lot of companies into trouble. They have unrealistic expectations. They were sold a vision of utopia by their software vendor or their system integrator. They get a proposal that looks good on paper, sounds good in theory, but in reality, it's not achievable. And that leads to a lot of bad decisions later on, which include cutting corners, cutting scope, cutting out change management, cutting testing cycles, all these bad decisions that you end up forced to make because you never had realistic expectations to begin with. So the question becomes, how do we get realistic expectations? And that's what we're going to cover next. So stick around. We're going to come back from a quick break and we'll talk more about how to create a realistic project plan. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space, and she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 187. This is the implementation planning episode. Thanks for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO at Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And in this last segment here in today's implementation planning episode, I want to talk about how to create a realistic project plan. We've talked a lot throughout this episode of the things you need to do to get ready for an implementation, and understanding what phase 0 is, understanding the difference between program and project management, understanding how to set up a project team and create a collaborative project team on your project. A lot of these things we've covered, but we haven't yet talked about how to create that realistic project plan. And this is arguably the most important part of this whole conversation here today, because if you don't have realistic expectations, you're probably going to fail in the project, or at the very least, you're going to have a bunch of really disappointed executives and team members and colleagues working with you based on the outcomes of the project, which are not necessarily aligned with reality. So this next segment is meant to really help you go in with your eyes wide open and understand how to take vendor proposals with a grain of salt, how to add a dose of reality to it, how to still be aggressive and still be, ambitious in your timeline and your budget and everything, but also be realistic. So that's really the whole point here. So let's roll the YouTube clip here of how to create a realistic project plan. Now, when putting together an implementation plan, one of the first things you can do that's very effective is to look at implementation benchmarks. I'm not talking about anecdotal examples of an example here or there, or that one company that did something one time. I'm talking about a subset of data that looks at broad cross-sections of organizations that have been through digital transformations. And I'm going to share with you a few of those best practices, which, by the way, you can find these benchmarks in our digital transformation report. I'm going to include a link to that in the description field below, so be sure to check that out, because that digital transformation report has benchmarks and metrics around what the average implementation looks like. So I'm going to share a few of those with you here today, but you can get more of them in the book that you can download below. So let's look at what some of the benchmarks are. And this is data that we've gathered and been studying for years now. In fact, over 10 years, we've been capturing and recording this data, really studying and understanding the industry. These are benchmarks that are not best practice necessarily. They're not necessarily best case scenarios, but it's the average. It's what happens in the average organization, how much time and money they spend on their transformations. Reason this is so important is because if we have these benchmarks, we can use this as sort of a gut check to see if we're in the ballpark of what the average organization experiences. So the first thing is, if we look at implementation timeline, the average implementation for any sort of ERP project or digital transformation is typically 18 months. And again, this is an average. So a large multinational organization is probably going to take 3 to 4 years or more. A smaller to mid-sized organization might only take 9 to 12 months. But the average for organizations across the globe, across industries, across different sizes, is 18 months. The average implementation cost, there's two different ways to look at it. I'll share with you two different metrics here. One is 2 to 3% of company revenue, or your annual turnover, however you describe it, is spent on a transformation. Sometimes this can be as high as 3 to 4% for a smaller organization, because you have less scale, less economies of scale with the cost, the way it's distributed. But the average is somewhere between 2 and 3% of annual revenue. So another way to look at this is, if you're a $100 million company, you're likely to spend $2 to $3 million total on your total cost of ownership for your transformation. Again, some organizations are going to be higher than that, some are going to be lower. A lot of it depends on scope, a lot of it depends on the complexity of your business. A lot of it depends on where you're moving from today versus where you're headed in the future. A lot of different variables can factor into this, but again, this is meant to give you a ballpark of what the average looks like. Another average cost metric that you can look at that can be very helpful is to look at 3 to 4 times your technology cost. So in other words, whatever you're spending on software, take 3 to 4 times that, and that's typically your total cost of ownership. Now this metric, keep in mind, we've been doing this for 10, 12 years or more that we've been studying this data. This has been a pretty steady metric, but one thing that's changing is the subscription model that most vendors are moving towards is throwing this number off. This was actually largely based on the old on-prem model. So what you need to do is, in some cases, translate the subscription model into what it would be in an on-premise situation and multiply it by 3 to 4 times, and that'll give you your total cost of ownership that may be spread out over multiple years, but that's going to be the total cost that most organizations are investing in their technology. And then just one other metric I'll share that's just worth noting. It doesn't necessarily affect your implementation plan itself, but it should affect your understanding of what risks you face by not having a solid implementation plan, is the fact that somewhere between 50 to 52% of organizations that go through a digital transformation have some sort of material operational disruption. And that's really important. I'm going to clarify that here, that this is a material disruption to their operations at the time of go live. This means that it wasn't just a little bit trickier than normal, or they had some learning curve issues or growing pains to get used to the software. These are major disruptions, like they couldn't ship product, couldn't close the books, couldn't run payroll, something of that nature, ranging from anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks onto several months, depending on how significant the disruption was. So that's something to be aware of as well, is you want to have a solid implementation plan so that you're mitigating risk and doing things in a way that doesn't lead you into the path of being one of these 50 to 52% of organizations that have a material operational disruption. So these are some benchmarks that you can use as a starting point just to get a view of a back of the envelope number of what your implementation duration and cost might be. And what we typically do with clients is we'll take these metrics and we'll apply them or move them up or down depending on complexity, size, industry, technology they're deploying, all these different things that factor in, but at least gives you a starting point on what your overall duration might be. So in addition to these metrics here, the next step I typically recommend is now you look at what does the implementation itself actually look like. And I'm going to sketch out what a software vendor will typically tell you what an implementation is going to look like, what some of the major steps are. And then I'm going to talk about what the other things are that can typically extend that duration. So let's start with what the software vendors are typically going to suggest or propose to you as an organization. Typically, they're going to suggest a process where you'll have your, let's call it design and requirements phase. That's usually a first phase of a project. And I'm not going to get into the whole waterfall versus agile discussion here because that's a whole nother conversation. Another video that I've got on my YouTube channel covers that in more detail. I'm going to act as though this is sort of a hybrid approach. We're going to do sort of waterfall, sort of agile, and let's figure out what that duration looks like and how it's going to apply to you. So design requirements typically happens early on. Then you have your software build, which is usually the next phase. Then you have test. Then you have training. And then that leads you to go live way over here. So let's assume here, I'm going to take this average over here. Let's assume that this proposal you get from your software vendor is that we can do this implementation here in 18 months. So we've got an 18-month process right here, according to your vendor. And again, that number is going to vary. You probably have a proposal that has a different number. We see some clients that get proposals as low as 3 months, some that are as high as 3 to 4 years. So it really just depends, but most of the time it's safe to assume that your software vendor is going to be underestimating, not because they're bad people or they don't know what they're doing, but as we'll talk about in a minute, because there's a lot of stuff missing from the overall project right here, or the overall project plan. So the first step then is to compare whatever's being proposed here, including the dollars, whatever the budget is, from your software vendor, and compare it to some of these metrics. If you're somewhere in the general ballpark, you might be relatively close, but I'd venture to say that whatever proposal you're looking at is probably a lot lower what you're getting proposed here versus what the average metric shows. And so what I want to do next is talk about what are some of the missing components that influence how long and how much money it's really going to take to implement your digital transformation. So we've got a proposal here from our software vendor. They've given us a duration, they've given us a budget, they've given us some tasks within the plan. Now we ask ourselves, why would this number be so understated, and why are these numbers so much more likely to be higher than these numbers? Well, there's a few reasons for that. It's because there's a lot of things missing from the software vendor's proposed plan. Keep in mind that a software vendor's proposed plan is for one piece of an overall program, or one piece of an overall digital transformation. And by the way, it's the other pieces that aren't in the purview of the software vendor that typically drive the most time and cost and heartburn during transformation. But the problem is most organizations don't realize it till they get into the project. Then they end up wondering why this timeline doesn't ever materialize or they don't ever get close to this. It's because there's a lot of stuff that fits in the cracks here, or that should fit in the cracks, that pushes things out. Now the key to this too, by the way, before I get into what some of those missing components are, is that the sooner you address these things and the more you plan to invest in these additional activities, the less time it's going to take you. And that's the irony of it all. If you wait until you're halfway or 2/3 through the project and then realize, oh wait, I need to invest in activities A, B, and C because it's not in our plan here, by then you've created some massive delays to your project already because you should have been doing those things early on. So what are those things? I'll talk about them right here. One is business process improvement. So I'm going to represent this by showing you the strain it has on a project plan. So your business process improvement generally is going to extend beyond this here. Process improvement is going to push things out quite a bit, because what happens is when you get to this phase, when the software vendor and the system integrator come in to define your requirements and start designing software, they need answers right away. They need to know, how do you want the software to work, and we're going to build it for you. And yes, there's some limitations based on how the software works, but today's ERP software and digital technologies are so flexible that there's a million different ways you can run your business using the same software. So we need to have a good vision of what our business processes are. If we don't, then what ends up happening is this stage right here ends up getting extended. It takes a lot longer to do this now because we don't have a vision of what we want to be when we grow up, so therefore this delays the project. Or if for some reason it doesn't delay the project, and this is potentially even worse, is it doesn't delay the project, but they end up just building the software the way they're most comfortable that doesn't fit with your business, which may not delay the project here, but down here, you're going to run into massive delays because it wasn't built in a way that supports your business and its objectives. Another thing that can push out a project significantly and should be factored into a realistic implementation plan is organizational change management. That's something else that's typically on the critical path. This activity, business process, I would say, is somewhat on the critical path, but I'd say it's more of a prerequisite to this phase right here. So a way to view business process would be that this activity should actually be happening right here, and that might extend your duration by, say, 3 months, and you've got your 18 months here, but it's going to take you 3 months before you ever start these 18 months to get your business processes figured out, especially if you're trying to standardize your operations, you're trying to act like one company, you want to consolidate, have unified end-to-end business processes. You need to take the time to define that up front so that you speed things up here. If you don't take that, say, 3 months right here to do that, everything gets pushed back. It's sort of like a domino effect that creates even bigger delays. So you're investing a little bit of time and money up here to save a lot more time and money over here. Change management is very similar, although change management is typically happening in parallel. If we wait until right here to do change management, we are almost certainly going to extend the go live significantly because we've had resistance building all along the way. We've had change management issues. We may not see or feel it yet until we get to training, but it has absolutely been developing and percolating. So if we wait until here, it's going to delay the project even more. But having said that, we want this parallel activity to be starting as early as possible, probably here during the business process phase, the pre-implementation phase, and continuing throughout implementation. And then one more I'll share with you is, I'll call it the non-software technical work stream. And what this is this is going to be things like your data mapping, data migration, your architecture, how the different modules, different systems tie together, how we're going to integrate different systems. That all needs to have a very clear plan and vision that starts up here before you ever start designing and building and testing. Reason for that is because in parallel with this, you're going to have to be doing a lot of those activities to make sure you're cleaning up data, mapping data, you're building the integrations, you're testing the integration when you get to the test phase, you're doing a number of those different things that are maybe outside the scope of a single ERP or a single software, but it's very relevant to an overall digital transformation. So the reason I point out these missing components is because these things put strains on the overall duration, especially when we don't do them at the right time or place and we don't invest the right resources and money in those activities. I already talked about how what happens with business process and some of the tech work streams if you don't do that work up front, and if you don't start your change management work up front. Yes, you might spend a little bit more time up front before you ever start the clock running on the 18 months here, but if you don't do that, it's probably going to extend it by a lot more than 3 months in that example of taking the 3 months up front. So these are just a few examples of how those strains happen. So now what we need to do is figure out how do we get a realistic plan now based on everything I've just mapped out here. So the next step now is we need to take this proposal that we get from the software vendor or vendors. Now we need to wrap in all this other stuff. So we need an overall program plan, not just a project plan for one work stream, but a program plan that includes all this stuff. And generally where we start, rather than trying to guess what all this is going to be when we don't really know at the point you've made a decision around what technology you're deploying, we don't really know how long this is going to take. Yes, we've got benchmarks here. Yes, we can make some initial assumptions or guesses around whether or not this is realistic, but we don't really know. So how do we know? How do we find out what a realistic plan is? Well, the first thing I'd say is this phase right here, I'm out of room here, but this phase, we'll call it the pre-implementation planning. Pre-implementation planning is the most important phase to accurately determine how long the rest of this is going to take. And generally, for most of our mid-sized to larger organizations, this is a 3 to 6 month process.
of doing all the stuff I mentioned here, defining your future state target operating model, your future state organizational design, doing some initial change impact, doing an organizational readiness assessment, creating a technology roadmap in terms of how different technologies are going to fit together, how they're going to integrate, how the data is going to migrate, how systems are going to be decommissioned, how and when are we going to decommission systems, what are we going to do in the interim while we decommission certain systems and start to bring on new systems, do we build interim interface points, all that stuff you've got to have figured out and know answers to before you can really determine what this is going to be. So the time and money you spend up here during pre-implementation planning is absolutely going to give you a lot more clarity and confidence in this plan. And then once you do that, then you can start to really map this out and say, okay, yes, the vendor thinks it's going to be 18 months, but based on what we know about how much we're changing our processes and how big of a change it is to our organization, how complex we are as an organization, the way we've staffed the project and the available resources internally, that gives us some variables that we can use to flex this up or down in terms of duration and cost. So this is where you start to take some of the science and convert it into art, or to augment and add in art to how long a project is going to take. And you start to work through some of those different variables that can give you a better, accurate representation of what the implementation time, cost, and resource commitments are going to be. This phase 2, also during the implementation planning, also gives you a better idea of what the risks are. So now you can start to get your handle on what the risks are and how we're going to mitigate those risks and really start to attack those risks from a risk mitigation perspective. So these are just some ways to figure out how you can convert a proposed implementation plan that might be completely inaccurate, somewhat of a guess, and overly optimistic into one that's more realistic and more suited for you as an organization.
So that's an overview of how to create a realistic project plan. And if you do one thing right in a project, that's a really important first step, is to have a realistic project plan that's complete, it's realistic, you have clear understanding and alignment on what the assumptions are, your budget makes sense, it fits the scope and the complexity of your business, all that stuff. So hopefully that's given you some things to think about, and hopefully it gives you some good guidance on how to create that realistic project plan. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. This is really meant to be sort of a crash course in implementation planning and phase 0 and just getting ready for a successful implementation. If you'd like to learn more, you can always reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. My team and I would love to chat with you about how to set your team up for success and how to help you plan and execute for a successful digital transformation. We have offices in North America, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, as well as Asia Pacific. So any region you might be in, we can help you. We've got a team locally to help you throughout the world. So be sure to reach out to me personally, or you can also go to our website at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can learn more about us there, but certainly feel free to reach out to me via the contact information I've included in the show notes below. So new episodes of the show comes out every Wednesday. TransformationGroundControl.com is the website. You can see all the past episodes there. You can keep up with new episodes. Again, that's Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm with Third Stage Consulting. The show's it's produced by Major Tom Productions. So thanks for being here today. We'll see you next Wednesday on Transformation Ground Control. Hope you have a great week in the meantime. Take care.